In the heart of the New Mexico desert, where red earth meets endless sky, two broken souls find each other. One, a girl who hasn't spoken a word in 3 years, carrying the ashes of her past in a small tin box. The other, a magnificent black stallion that men call demon and killer, whose spirit refuses to be broken. What is it about the silent language of trauma that can bridge impossible divides? What power exists in the connection between a child without voice and a creature without freedom? Sometimes the deepest bonds form in the darkest places. Sometimes salvation comes not from those who would rescue us, but from those who recognize our true nature beneath the scars. This is not just a story about a girl and a horse. This is a journey into the wilderness of the heart where trust becomes the most precious currency and freedom the ultimate prize. Welcome to Midnight Bond. Flames surged across the New Mexico desert, a wall of orange and red that devoured everything in its path. The heat distorted the air, creating wavering mirages against the stark landscape. Maya Collins stood frozen, her thin 15-year-old frame silhouetted against the inferno. Behind her, dust clouds signaled the approach of Victor's men. Their shouts carried on the wind, growing louder with each passing second. There was nowhere to run. To her right stood Midnight, a coal-black stallion whose muscles tensed beneath a coat that gleamed like obsidian in the firelight. The horse pawed nervously at the ground, nostrils flaring at the acrid scent of smoke. His ears flicked back and forth between the approaching men and the wall of fire blocking their escape. Maya turned to face the horse, placing one trembling hand against his powerful neck. Their eyes met the girl's, dark with determination, the horse's wild with fear. "This is when we have to trust each other," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. The stallion snorted, tossing his head. For a heartbeat, they remained suspended in time, girl and horse, two wounded souls united against impossible odds. Maya grabbed a handful of Midnight's mane and swung herself onto his bare back. She leaned forward, pressing her cheek against his neck. "We can make it," she breathed into his ear. "Together." With a final glance at the approaching men, Maya squeezed her knees against Midnight's sides. The stallion hesitated only a moment before launching forward straight toward the wall of fire. 2 months earlier. The autumn sun beat mercilessly on the corrugated metal roofs of Blackridge Ranch. Heat shimmered above the buildings, creating a mirage that made the distant red mountains waver and dance. Dust devils spun across the parched earth, stirring up miniature tornadoes that disappeared as quickly as they formed. In the main training arena, a crowd had gathered. Well-dressed visitors fanned themselves beneath the sparse shade of a canvas awning, sipping iced tea and wiping sweat from their brows. They weren't here for comfort, they were here for the show. Victor Harmon stood in the center of the ring, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the packed dirt. A pronounced limp didn't diminish his commanding presence. The right side of his face bore a jagged scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. He was 58, with silver hair, cropped military short, and eyes the color of flint. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the arena, "what you're about to witness is the difference between a wild animal and a useful one." He gestured toward a holding pen where a chestnut mare paced nervously, her coat lathered with sweat despite the handler's attempts to keep her still. "This mare was running wild 3 weeks ago. Worthless. Dangerous." Victor's voice hardened. "But nothing that can't be fixed with the right persuasion." He nodded to his men, who opened the gate. The mare burst into the arena, eyes rolling white with fear. She galloped around the perimeter, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Victor stood motionless in the center, a long training whip coiled in his hand. His face betrayed no emotion as he watched the horse exhaust herself. Only when her gallop slowed to a trot did he begin to move. What followed was what Victor called the breaking ceremony, a brutal demonstration of dominance that had made Blackridge Ranch famous in certain circles. The whip cracked, the mare flinched. Each time she tried to escape, Victor cut off her path. His movements were precise, calculated to maximize psychological impact. After 20 minutes, the mare stood trembling, her head lowered in submission. When Victor approached and placed a hand on her sweat-soaked neck, she didn't pull away, her spirit visibly broken. "Control," Victor announced to the appreciative murmurs of his audience, "is not about strength. It's about breaking the will first. A wild thing believes it has choices. My job is to teach it otherwise. He ran a hand down the mare's face in what might have appeared a gentle gesture to the untrained eye. But it was ownership, not affection. Any questions before we discuss prices? He asked, sweeping his gaze across the potential buyers. From behind a stack of hay bales at the edge of the arena, a pair of dark eyes watched the entire scene. Maya Collins had learned to make herself invisible at Blackridge. She had perfected the art of existing in the peripheral vision of the ranch hands, present enough to be useful, invisible enough to avoid notice. Her thin frame was swallowed by clothes too large for her cast-offs and donations that hung from her shoulders like fabric ghosts. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail revealed a face that might have been pretty, if not for the perpetual wariness that tightened her features. She hadn't spoken a word in 3 years, not since the fire. Maya watched Victor's demonstration with a familiar hollowness in her chest. The mare's broken submission mirrored something inside her, a recognition that made her fingers dig into the rough wood of the hay bale. As the wealthy clients began discussing prices and Victor basked in their admiration, Maya slipped away unnoticed. She had seen this ceremony dozens of times. It never changed, and neither did the cold knot that formed in her stomach whenever she witnessed it. Black Ridge Ranch sprawled across 70 acres of New Mexico desert, its buildings arranged in a rough horseshoe around a central yard. The main house, Victor's domain, stood apart from the rest, its adobe walls and red-tiled roof a stark contrast to the utilitarian barns and bunkhouses where workers and animals were housed. Maya's room was little more than a converted storage closet behind the tack shed, 6 feet by 8 feet of space containing a narrow cot, a plastic milk crate that served as both table and chair, and a cardboard box holding her few possessions. The single window was covered with wire mesh that cast prison bar shadows across the floor when the sun hit it at certain angles. She ducked inside, closing the door against the heat and dust. From beneath her thin mattress, she withdrew a small tin box, once bright red, now scratched and dented from years of hiding. Inside lay her most precious possessions, a half-burned photograph of her parents, their smiling faces partially consumed by flame, a small red cloth embroidered with the silhouette of a running horse, her mother's last gift, and a folded newspaper clipping about the factory fire that had taken everything from her. Maya traced her finger over her mother's face in the photograph. Sarah Collins had the same dark eyes, the same delicate features that Maya saw in her own reflection. Her father, James, stood tall and proud beside his wife, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. The portion of the photo that showed his face had been eaten away by fire, leaving only the suggestion of a smile. The sound of boots on gravel pulled Maya from her memories. She quickly returned the box to its hiding place and composed her face into the blank mask she wore around the ranch. "Girl, where are you hiding?" The gruff voice belonged to Lucas, Victor's most loyal enforcer. "Got work for you in the isolation barn. Move it." Maya emerged from her room, eyes downcast. Lucas stood waiting, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His weathered face creased into a frown at the sight of her. "Damn waste of space," he muttered. "Should have left you at that state home." Maya followed, silently, used to the constant stream of verbal abuse. Lucas was simply the loudest of the ranch hands. Most ignored her existence except when they needed something cleaned or carried. The isolation barn stood apart from the other buildings, a low structure with reinforced stalls designed to hold the most difficult cases, horses deemed too dangerous or valuable to house with the others. As they approached, Maya could hear the unmistakable sounds of a struggle, men shouting, wood splintering, the panicked whinnying of a horse in distress. Lucas quickened his pace, a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Looks like the new one's giving him hell. About time you see what a real wild one looks like." The scene inside the barn made Maya freeze in the doorway. 3 men wrestled with ropes attached to a massive black stallion that reared and struck out with deadly precision. One handler already lay groaning in the straw, clutching his ribs. Another backed away, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The horse was magnificent, at least 17 hands high, with a coat so black it seemed to absorb the light. Muscles rippled beneath that dark hide as he fought against the ropes, his movements a terrifying dance of power and desperation. Victor stood just outside the pen, watching with cold calculation. When he spotted Lucas and Maya, he beckoned them closer. "Perfect timing," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement Maya had rarely heard. "Lucas, get another rope on him." Girl, stand back and watch how we handle a real demon. The stallion's eyes rolled white with fear and rage as Lucas grabbed a rope and entered the pen. Maya pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible as the men worked to subdue the horse. This one's special, Victor said, his gaze never leaving the struggling animal. Captured near the tribal lands, killed 2 men during the roundup, nearly took out a helicopter. Been moving him from ranch to ranch because nobody can break him. His mouth curved into something resembling a smile, though it never reached his eyes. But they didn't have my methods. The stallion suddenly lunged, breaking free from one of the handlers. In a blur of motion, he charged toward the spot where Maya stood. She didn't scream, didn't run, her body frozen in place as death barreled toward her in the form of 1,200 pounds of terrified horse. At the last possible moment, the stallion skidded to a halt, ropes pulling tight around his neck. He reared again, front hooves slashing the air mere feet from Maya's face. And in that suspended moment, their eyes met. Maya saw something in those dark depths that stole her breath, not mindless rage or animal fear, but a desperate intelligence. Recognition. The stallion saw her too, really saw her in a way that no human at Blackridge ever had. The connection lasted only a heartbeat before the men yanked the horse backward, cursing and shouting. But it had happened. Maya felt it like an electric current through her body. "Get that girl out of here!" Victor shouted, his face flushed with anger. "Lucas, what were you thinking bringing her in with that monster loose?" Lucas grabbed Maya's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh as he dragged her toward the door. "Sorry, boss. Thought she might be useful." "She's useless for anything but scrubbing floors," Victor snapped. "Get her back to the tack room where she belongs." As Lucas pulled her away, Maya cast one last glance over her shoulder. The stallion had stopped fighting, his sides heaving with exertion. His gaze followed her out the door. "That's Midnight," Lucas said as they crossed the yard. "Boss paid a fortune for him. Says he's got special bloodlines or some nonsense. Personally, I think he's just demon-possessed." He chuckled. "Fitting name, though, black as sin." Maya barely registered his words, her mind still locked on that moment of connection. For the first time in years, something had pierced the protective numbness she'd wrapped around herself. The horse had seen her, not as a servant, not as a burden, not as a mute orphan to be pitied or scorned. He had seen her as she was a soul as trapped and isolated as his own. The following days fell into their usual rhythm. Maya rose before dawn, completed her morning chores, feeding the stable horses, mucking stalls, filling water troughs, and then moved on to whatever tasks were assigned. She ate when food was offered, slept when darkness fell, and spoke to no one. But something had changed inside her. Every spare moment her thoughts returned to the black stallion. She found excuses to walk past the isolation barn, stealing glimpses of midnight through cracks in the weathered boards. Victor had assembled his best handlers to work with the horse, but their methods were yielding little progress. Each day, Maya would hear the shouts, the crack of whips, the thundering of hooves against wood. Each evening, she would see the men emerge, cursing and nursing new bruises. "That devil's going to kill someone," she overheard one handler say as he pressed a cold beer against a swollen eye. "3 weeks and he's still fighting like it's day one." "I'll wait. Victor's obsessed with breaking him," another replied. "Says if we can't do it in another week, he's sending him to the slaughterhouse. Too dangerous to keep around." The casual threat sent a chill through Maya. She'd seen horses come and go at Blackridge. Those that submitted became valuable commodities. Those that didn't disappeared. But the thought of Midnight's proud spirit being extinguished forever left an ache in her chest she couldn't explain. That night, after the ranch had settled into silence, Maya slipped from her room. The moon hung low and bright, casting long shadows across the yard as she made her way toward the isolation barn. She moved silently, years of practice allowing her to avoid the creaking boards and noisy gravel patches that might give her away. The barn door was secured with a simple latch. Maya lifted it carefully, wincing at the slight metallic scrape. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay horse and fear. A single security light cast a pale glow over the central aisle. Midnight occupied the end stall, reinforced with extra planks after his repeated attempts to break free. As Maya approached, she could see his dark shape shifting restlessly. A soft nicker of warning rumbled from the stall. She stopped several feet away, making no attempt to move closer. Instead, she sank to the floor, folding her legs beneath her, and simply sat in the semi-darkness. The stallion's movement stilled as he registered her presence. She could feel his gaze on her, wary and intense. For nearly an hour they remained this way, the girl silent and motionless, the horse watchful, neither advancing nor retreating. When Maya finally rose to leave, her legs stiff from sitting on the hard-packed earth, Midnight huffed softly. Not a challenge, but an acknowledgement. She returned the following night, this time bringing a small offering, a withered apple she'd saved from her meager dinner. She didn't try to feed it directly to the stallion, simply placed it on the ground near his stall, before assuming her now familiar position on the floor. Midnight didn't approach the apple until Maya had been sitting quietly for nearly 30 minutes. Even then, he stretched his neck cautiously, nostrils flaring as he caught the fruit's scent. His lips carefully closed around it, drawing it into his stall, while keeping a wary eye on the silent girl. Night after night, Maya continued her vigil, gradually moving closer to the stall. Sometimes she brought small treats, an apple core, a handful of oats, a piece of carrot. She never spoke, never made sudden movements. She simply existed in the same space as the stallion, offering a presence unlike any he had encountered in his captivity. On the seventh night, she dared to sit directly beside the stall door. Midnight stood at the back wall watching her with those intelligent eyes. When she placed her offering, a bit of sugar, smuggled from the kitchen, on her open palm and extended her hand into the stall, he didn't retreat. Minutes passed. Maya's arm began to ache, but she held it steady. Finally, Midnight took a single step forward, then another. His approach was deliberate, ears flicking forward and back as he assessed the situation. When he reached her hand, his whiskers tickled her palm as he delicately took the sugar. The touch sent a shiver through Maya, not of fear, but of something long forgotten. Connection. As Midnight's warm breath ghosted over her skin, she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. A sudden noise from outside the barn shattered the moment. Maya withdrew her hand quickly as footsteps approached. She scrambled to her feet, looking frantically for a hiding place, but it was too late. The barn door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. Raymond, the oldest of the ranch hands, stood silhouetted in the doorway. His weathered face, lined with 70 years of sun and hardship, revealed nothing as he took in the scene before him, the girl frozen beside the stall of the ranch's most dangerous horse. Maya braced herself for the shout, the inevitable punishment that would follow when Victor learned of her trespassing. But Raymond simply closed the door behind him and moved forward with a curious deliberation. He stopped several feet away, his gaze moving from Maya to Midnight and back again. The stallion had retreated to the back of his stall, but was watching intently, ears pricked forward. "Well now," Raymond said softly, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "That's something you don't see every day." Maya remained still, uncertain of his intentions. "Knew somebody was coming in here at night," he continued. "Figured it might be you." He nodded toward Midnight. "He's calmer, less rage in his eyes. Been wondering why." He took a step closer, careful to make no threatening movements. "You got away with him, it seems, just like your mama had." Maya's head snapped up, eyes widening at the unexpected words. Raymond's mouth curved in a gentle smile. "Yeah, I knew Sarah before you were born. She worked with wild horses, had a gift for calming the worst cases." He glanced at Midnight. "You've got her soul." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small paper bag. "Brought these for him. Peppermints. Horses love 'em." He held out the bag to Maya, who hesitated before accepting it. "Keep what's precious quiet," Raymond advised, his voice low and serious. "Folks around here don't reckon much with gentle things." He nodded toward Midnight. "Victor's getting impatient with him. Plans to sell him to the slaughterhouse end of next week if he's not broken by then." Maya's fingers tightened around the bag of peppermints. "I'll keep your secret," Raymond promised. "But be careful. This ain't a place that forgives weakness in horses or people." With that, he turned and left as quietly as he had come, leaving Maya with questions burning in her throat and a new fear gripping her heart. The town of Cimarron was little more than a collection of sun-bleached buildings clustered around a main street. 30 miles from Black Ridge Ranch, it served as the nearest source of supplies and the only connection to the outside world for those living in the isolated valley. Maya rarely left the ranch, but twice a month, Raymond would take the truck into town for supplies, and sometimes if her chores were done and no one was paying attention, she was allowed to ride along. These brief excursions were precious moments of freedom, even if she spent most of them waiting in the truck while Raymond gathered what they needed. Today, as Raymond loaded bags of feed and boxes of supplies into the truck bed, Maya sat on a bench outside the general store watching the sparse traffic move through town. The store was the heart of Cimarron, part grocery, part hardware, part community center, where locals gathered to exchange news and gossip. Going to be a bit longer, Raymond told her, wiping sweat from his brow. Gotta pick up some special order items for the boss. Stay put, okay? Maya nodded, content to absorb the simple pleasure of being away from Blackridge. As Raymond disappeared back into the store, she noticed an elderly Native American woman watching her from the shade of a nearby awning. The woman's face was deeply lined, her silver hair pulled back in a traditional bun. She wore a turquoise necklace that caught the sunlight, sending blue flashes across the weathered boards of the storefront. Her dark eyes held Maya's with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. After a long moment, the woman approached, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who had walked the earth for many decades. You're from Harmon's place, she said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, unsure why this stranger would know or care. I'm Grace Running Wolf, the woman said, settling beside Maya on the bench. I've seen you before with the old man. She studied Maya's face with open curiosity. You don't speak, do they say? But your eyes, they speak plenty. Maya shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. They're bringing in wild horses again, Grace continued, gazing out at the street. Helicopters chasing them across sacred land. Harmon buys the ones with spirit, likes to break them himself. Her mouth tightened. That land used to belong to my people, before men like him decided everything wild needed to be owned. She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small cloth bag tied with sinew. You have the sign of a horse speaker, she said, pressing the bag into Maya's hand. Someone who can hear what they say without words. Maya stared at the small pouch, confused. Herbs, Grace explained. For healing, for building trust. Her voice dropped lower. I hear they captured a special one. Black as night with a star mark. The last of his bloodline. Maya's pulse quickened. Midnight. There's a story among my people, Grace continued, about horses that carry the spirit of the land in their blood. They choose who they trust. Cannot be broken, only befriended. She tapped the pouch in Maya's hand. Mix with water. Let him smell it on your hands. Before Maya could process this strange encounter, Raymond emerged from the store. Making friends, I see, he said, his tone careful, as he nodded to Grace. Hello, Ms. Running Wolf. Raymond, Grace acknowledged with a slight nod. Taking good care of this one, I hope. Best I can, he replied, a current of meaning flowing beneath the simple words. Grace rose, placing a weathered hand briefly on Maya's shoulder. Remember what I said, child. Some spirits recognize each other. With that, she moved away, disappearing into the shadowed interior of the store. Grace is good people, Raymond said as they climbed back into the truck. Knows more about these lands than anyone. He glanced at the pouch Maya still clutched. Whatever she gave you, keep it safe. Her kind of knowledge is rare these days. As they drove back toward Blackridge, Maya's mind swirled with questions. How did Grace know about midnight? What did she mean about horse speakers? And most puzzling of all, how did Raymond know her mother? The answers would have to wait. As they approached the ranch, Raymond's expression grew serious. Victor's son is back, he said, nodding toward a sleek black car parked outside the main house. Ethan, home from college for a while, seems like. Just so you know, he's cut from different cloth than his father, but he's still a Harmon. Best keep your distance. Maya tucked the pouch of herbs into her pocket, alongside the growing collection of mysteries that seemed to be gathering around her, like storm clouds. She had a feeling that Ethan Harmon's return was just one more complication in an increasingly tangled web. Maya caught her first glimpse of Ethan Harmon later that afternoon as she carried buckets of water to the training paddock. Tall and lean, with his father's sharp features softened by youth, he stood on the porch of the main house, engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Victor. Even from a distance, the strained body language was clear, Victor gesturing sharply, Ethan's shoulders rigid with contained anger. Though she couldn't hear the words, Maya recognized the familiar pattern of Victor's dominance and another submission. She had seen it play out countless times with horses workers and anyone else who crossed the ranch owner's path. As she passed nearby, Ethan's gaze briefly shifted to her. Unlike his father's dismissive glances, his eyes held a flicker of curiosity. Maya quickly looked away, continuing her task without pause. Drawing attention was never safe at Blackridge. That evening, as darkness settled over the ranch, Maya made her customary visit to Midnight. The stallion had grown accustomed to her presence, greeting her with a soft nicker when she appeared. Tonight she brought one of Grace's peppermints and the pouch of herbs the native woman had given her. Following Grace's instructions, she had mixed a small amount of the herbs with water, creating a fragrant paste that she rubbed between her palms. When she approached Midnight's stall, she extended her hands, allowing him to catch the unfamiliar scent. The reaction was immediate and surprising. The stallion's nostrils flared as he breathed deeply. Then he pressed his muzzle against the bars, straining to reach her. Maya moved closer, allowing him to investigate her herb-scented hands. He seemed almost entranced, his usual wariness replaced by intense interest. Emboldened, Maya slowly unlatched the stall door, something she had never dared before. She slipped inside, leaving the door ajar behind her. Midnight watched, her ears pricked forward, but made no aggressive move. They stood 3 feet apart, sharing the same small space for the first time. Maya extended her hand palm up, offering the peppermint. Midnight lowered his head, taking the treat with surprising gentleness. As he crunched the candy, Maya cautiously raised her other hand to touch his neck. His coat was smooth and warm beneath her fingers. She felt the powerful muscles tense briefly, then relax as she stroked gently down his shoulder. It was the first time she had touched him, beyond the brief contact of feeding, and the trust implicit in the moment brought a lump to her throat. A sudden noise from outside shattered the peaceful moment. Maya froze, her hand still on Midnight's neck. Someone was approaching the barn. Heart racing, she backed toward the stall door, preparing to slip out before being discovered. But she wasn't quick enough. The barn door swung open, spilling yellow light across the center aisle. Ethan Harmon stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the outside lights. Maya pressed herself against the wall of the stall, as if she could somehow melt into the shadows. Midnight shifted restlessly, but didn't make a sound. Ethan took a step forward, peering into the dimness. "Hello, is someone in here?" Maya remained perfectly still, scarcely breathing. Ethan moved further into the barn, his footsteps deliberate on the packed earth floor. When he reached Midnight's stall, he stopped, surprise evident in his voice. "The stall door's open," he said, more to himself than to any expected listener. Then, as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, "What the—" He had spotted Maya pressed against the wall inside the stall with the notorious killer horse. "Don't move," he said urgently. "That horse is dangerous. I'll get help." Maya shook her head emphatically, finally stepping away from the wall. She placed a calming hand on Midnight's neck, hoping Ethan would understand that she wasn't in danger. Ethan stared in disbelief. "How are you? He lets you touch him." Midnight shifted, turning his attention to the newcomer. His ears flattened slightly, but he made no aggressive move. "Everyone says this horse is untamable," Ethan continued, keeping his distance from the stall. "My father's been trying to break him for weeks." Maya stroked Midnight's neck, trying to communicate through gesture what she couldn't say in words, that force wasn't the answer, that trust had to be earned. "You're the girl who doesn't speak," Ethan said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Maya, right, I've heard about you." She nodded cautiously. "And you've somehow befriended this horse?" He shook his head in amazement. "My father would never believe it." The mention of Victor sent a chill through Maya. If he learned she had been entering Midnight's stall, defying his direct orders about the dangerous stallion, her fear must have shown on her face, because Ethan's expression softened. "Don't worry, I won't tell him." He studied her for a moment. "You care about this horse, don't you?" Maya nodded again, more emphatically. "He's scheduled for the slaughterhouse next week." Ethan said, his voice neutral. "My father's given up on breaking him." Panic flared in Maya's chest. Raymond had warned her, but hearing the death sentence from Ethan made it terrifyingly real. She shook her head vehemently, her hand tightening on Midnight's mane. "I don't see what choice there is," Ethan continued. "He's too dangerous to keep around if he can't be trained, and my father never changes his mind once it's made up." Maya felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. If only she could explain, if only she could make him understand what she had discovered, that Midnight wasn't vicious, just terrified and fighting for his life. To her surprise, Ethan stepped closer to the stall, his movements slow and deliberate. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the horse. Maya hesitated, then nodded, keeping one hand on Midnight's neck. The stallion tensed as Ethan approached but didn't pull away. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, extending his hand for the horse to sniff. "I'm not like my father." Midnight's nostrils flared as he caught Ethan's scent. After a tense moment, he allowed the young man to touch his muzzle briefly. "Remarkable," Ethan breathed. "Everyone said he was a killer." A sound outside the barn startled all three of them. Midnight tossed his head nervously, and Maya quickly guided him back into his stall, securing the door. "Someone's coming," Ethan whispered. "You should go. If my father catches you here—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Maya slipped past him, heading for the rear exit, but Ethan caught her arm gently. "Wait, come back tomorrow night. Maybe there's something we can figure out." Maya searched his face, looking for deception, for any sign that this was a trap. Finding none, she nodded once before disappearing into the darkness. As she made her way back to her small room, a dangerous spark of hope flickered to life in her chest. Ethan had seen Midnight's true nature. He had promised secrecy. And most surprisingly of all, he had suggested helping. For the first time since arriving at Blackridge, Maya allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where Midnight wasn't destined for slaughter, where there might be allies in unexpected places. But as she slipped through the shadows, Maya didn't notice the figure watching from the darkened window of the main house. Victor Harmon stood silhouetted against the faint light of his study, a glass of whiskey in one hand. His eyes narrowed as they tracked his son's return from the isolation barn. The following day passed with excruciating slowness. Maya moved through her chores mechanically, her mind constantly returning to the night's revelations and the promise of another meeting with Ethan. What did he mean by figuring something out? Could he actually help save Midnight? She was so preoccupied that she nearly collided with Victor as she carried clean tack from the wash rack to the equipment room. "Watch where you're going, girl," he snapped, his cold eyes raking over her. He seemed to study her more intently than usual, as if searching for something in her face. "You seem distracted today. Something on your mind?" Maya quickly shook her head, lowering her gaze in the submissive posture that was expected. "Good, because distracted workers make mistakes, and I don't tolerate mistakes at Blackridge." He reached out suddenly, gripping her chin and forcing her face up. "You remember what happened to the last person who made a serious mistake here, don't you?" She did. A ranch hand who had accidentally left a gate open, allowing 3 valuable horses to escape. Victor had beaten him publicly before firing him. The message had been clear to everyone: failure had consequences. "My son seems to have taken an interest in you," Victor continued, his voice deceptively casual. "He mentioned you're good with horses, said he saw you working in the stable yesterday." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Had Ethan betrayed her, after all? Ethan has always been soft-hearted. Gets it from his mother. A shadow crossed Victor's face at the mention of his deceased wife. He doesn't understand that softness is weakness, and weakness gets punished in this world. He released her chin, stepping back. "You stay away from my son, girl, and you stay away from that black stallion. Both are worth more than your miserable life, and I won't have you ruining either of them." "Understood?" Maya nodded quickly, clutching the tack to her chest like a shield. "Good." Victor turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Maya, if I find out you've disobeyed me, you'll be looking for a new place to live. The state homes aren't kind to damaged goods like you, I hear." He walked away, his limp barely noticeable, as he crossed the yard toward the main house. Maya remained frozen, the threat hanging in the air like the scent of an approaching storm. By nightfall, her fear had hardened into determination. Victor's threats only confirmed what she already knew. Midnight's time was running out, and the stallion's fate was somehow intertwined with her own. She couldn't abandon him now. The moon was obscured by clouds as Maya made her way to the isolation barn. The darkness felt oppressive, pregnant with foreboding. When she slipped through the door, she found Ethan already waiting, a flashlight pointing at the ground to avoid attracting attention from outside. "You came," he said, obvious relief in his voice. I wasn't sure you would, especially after he trailed off, but Maya understood. After Victor's warning, she should have stayed away. The fact that she hadn't spoke volumes. My father threatened you, didn't he? Ethan asked quietly. Maya nodded, approaching Midnight's stall. The stallion greeted her with a soft nicker, pressing his muzzle against the bars. I'm sorry. He's not always been like this. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. After my mother died, something broke in him. He believes the world is divided into predators and prey, and he's determined to be the former. Maya listened as she stroked Midnight's face, finding comfort in the horse's steady presence. I saw you two together last night, Ethan continued. The way he trusts you, it's remarkable. I've never seen anything like it, especially with a horse everyone claims is untamable. He moved closer, careful to keep his movements slow and non-threatening. Midnight watched him warily, but didn't show the aggression he displayed with most handlers. I did some research today, Ethan said. Called a friend who works with wild horse conservation. She says Midnight might be part of a special bloodline horses that the Navajo consider sacred. They call them spirit carriers. They're known for their intelligence and for bonding strongly with specific people. Maya thought of Grace's words about horse speakers and spirits recognizing each other. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pouch of herbs, showing it to Ethan. What's that? He asked, leaning closer to see in the dim light. She mimicked mixing the herbs with water and applying it to her hands, then gestured to Midnight. Some kind of herbal mixture for the horse, Ethan guessed. When she nodded, he continued. Where did you get it? Maya mimed an elderly woman. An old woman gave it to you. Wait, was it? Grace Running Wolf. Maya's surprised expression confirmed his guess. I know Grace. She's a respected elder in the Navajo community. My father, he has history with her people. Not good history. Ethan's face darkened. This land used to belong to her tribe before my grandfather acquired it. There are sacred sites here that my father refuses to acknowledge. He gestured to Midnight. If Grace gave you something for this horse, she must believe he's important. He hesitated, then added, my friend also told me something disturbing. Apparently my father has been specifically targeting horses, with Midnight's markings, the ones with the hidden star on the forehead. He's had at least 3 others brought to the ranch over the past few years. Maya frowned, not understanding. None of them are still here, Ethan explained grimly. All supposedly sent to special buyers. But my friend says no one in the legitimate horse world ever saw them again. A chill ran down Maya's spine. What was Victor doing with these special horses? There's more, Ethan continued, his voice dropping even lower. I found some old papers in my father's study, records of your arrival here, correspondence with the state about your guardianship. Maya's attention sharpened. Victor never discussed her status at the ranch, simply treating her as property like the horses and equipment. Your parents didn't die in an accident, Maya. They were investigating illegal activities, something about wildlife trafficking and protected species. The factory fire was deliberately set. The world seemed to tilt beneath Maya's feet. She had always been told it was an accident, a tragic malfunction that took her parents in a random act of fate. The possibility that someone had intentionally caused their deaths, had murdered them, sent a wave of nausea through her. I'm sorry, Ethan said, seeing her distress. I know it's a lot to take in, but there's something else you should know. You have an aunt who's been looking for you, Elna Collins. She's filed multiple inquiries with the state, but somehow the paperwork always gets lost before reaching you. Maya's eyes widened. An aunt. Someone looking for her? It seemed impossible after years of believing she had no one left. My father has been intercepting the communications, Ethan explained. I found the letters. I think he's keeping you isolated for a reason. Maybe because of what your parents were investigating before they died. The implications were staggering. Maya leaned against Midnight's stall for support, her mind racing to process everything Ethan had revealed. We need to get you and Midnight out of here, Ethan said decisively. Both of you are in danger as long as you remain at Blackridge. Maya looked at him questioningly. How could they possibly escape? Where would they go? I have a plan. Ethan continued, but it's risky. There's a wildlife sanctuary about 100 miles south, run by a friend of Grace's. They take in rescued animals, including horses. They might be willing to shelter you both temporarily while we contact your aunt. The idea of escaping, of taking Midnight somewhere safe, was both terrifying and exhilarating. But the practical obstacles seemed insurmountable. Midnight had never been properly halter trained, let alone taught to load into a trailer. And Victor kept the ranch under tight control. Workers weren't allowed to leave without permission. Vehicles were accounted for, gates were monitored. As if reading her doubts, Ethan smiled grimly. It won't be easy, but we have help. On cue, the barn door opened slightly and Raymond slipped inside. His weathered face was solemn as he joined them. So she knows, he asked Ethan. Most of it, Ethan confirmed. Not everything. Raymond nodded, turning to Maya. I worked with your mother for years protecting wild horses. When I heard what happened to her and your father, I tried to find you. By the time I tracked you to Blackridge, Victor had already established guardianship. He glanced at Midnight. This horse, he's special. Part of a bloodline the Navajo have protected for generations. Victor's been hunting them down systematically. I don't know why, but it can't be good. Maya looked between the two men, these unexpected allies, and felt a fragile hope beginning to grow. We need to move quickly, Raymond continued. Victor's scheduled the slaughterhouse truck for Monday, 4 days from now, and he's starting to suspect something's going on with you, Maya. Ethan nodded grimly. I'll work on getting transportation arranged. Raymond, can you contact the sanctuary? Already done, the older man confirmed. They're expecting us, but we'll need to get across the border into the reservation lands. Victor has friends in the local sheriff's office. They won't hesitate to stop us if he reports the horse stolen. And he will, Ethan added darkly. My father doesn't let go of what he considers his property. Maya felt Midnight shift behind her, as if the stallion sensed the gravity of their discussion. She placed a hand on his neck, drawing strength from his solid presence. For 3 years, she had existed in a state of numb survival, moving through each day like a ghost. Now suddenly she found herself at the center of a dangerous conspiracy with allies she barely knew, and a horse everyone else feared. The risk was enormous. If they failed, Victor would show no mercy. She would lose the fragile security of Blackridge, meager as it was. Midnight would die. And Ethan and Raymond would face consequences she couldn't bear to imagine. But for the first time since the fire that took her parents, Maya felt fully alive. The numbness that had protected her for so long was giving way to a fierce determination that burned like a flame in her chest. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could almost hear her mother's voice. Some spirits are too wild to break. They're meant to run free. Maya looked at Midnight, at the proud arch of his neck, and the intelligence in his dark eyes. Then she turned to Ethan and Raymond and nodded decisively. They were going to escape, together. Outside the barn, the clouds parted briefly, allowing moonlight to spill across the yard. In the silvery glow, the silhouette of a man moved silently toward the main house, Lucas Victor's most loyal enforcer, his face grim with the weight of what he had just overheard. Dawn arrived with the harsh blare of the ranch bell jarring Maya from a fitful sleep. She had returned to her small room well past midnight, her mind racing with all that Ethan and Raymond had revealed. Now, as pale light filtered through the wire-covered window, the revelations of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike in their enormity. Her parents' death wasn't an accident. She had an aunt searching for her. Victor was hunting horses like Midnight for some sinister purpose. And most immediate of all, they were planning an escape in just 3 days. The weight of it all pressed against Maya's chest as she rose and prepared for the day. She had to maintain normalcy to move through her chores as if nothing had changed. Any deviation from her usual routine might alert Victor that something was amiss. As she crossed the yard toward the main barn, Maya noticed increased activity near the training arena. Victor stood at the center, issuing orders to a group of handlers. Midnight was being led from the isolation barn, fighting every step of the way. 4 men struggled with the ropes that controlled him, his powerful body twisting and lunging against their restraint. Maya's heart seized with fear. Had Victor changed his plans? Was he sending Midnight to slaughter early? Ethan appeared from the direction of the main house, his posture stiff as he approached his father. Maya couldn't hear their conversation, but Victor's gestures were animated, his face flushed with determination. Ethan's responses seemed measured, his expression carefully neutral. Big day for the demon horse, Lucas said, appearing beside Maya with unsettling suddenness. His thin lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Boss is giving him one last chance before the slaughterhouse. Maya forced her face to remain impassive, though panic fluttered in her chest. Heard some interesting talk in the isolation barn last night. Lucas continued casually studying her reaction. About bloodlines and sanctuaries. About escapes. Ice flooded Maya's veins. Lucas had overheard them. Their plan was compromised before it had even begun. Boss wants to see you, he said, gripping her arm. Now. Maya had no choice but to follow as Lucas steered her toward the training arena. Victor turned as they approached, his cold gaze settling on her with calculating intensity. Ah, the mute girl, he said, his voice carrying the false warmth he used when performing for an audience. Several potential buyers stood at the edge of the arena, wealthy men in expensive hats watching the proceedings with interest. Just in time for our demonstration. Maya glanced desperately toward Ethan, who stood rigid with tension. His slight head shake warned her to stay calm. You see, gentlemen, Victor continued, addressing his guests, breaking a truly wild spirit requires understanding what it values. He gestured toward Midnight, who stood trembling with tension, nostrils flared and eyes rolling. This stallion has resisted every conventional method, but last night my foreman discovered something interesting. Lucas smiled smugly, tightening his grip on Maya's arm. It seems our little orphan has developed a bond with this killer. Victor said, his eyes never leaving Maya's face, which gives us a unique opportunity to demonstrate an alternative approach to submission. He beckoned to Maya. Come here, girl. Terror paralyzed her limbs. Victor was going to somehow use her connection with Midnight. But for what purpose? When she didn't move, Lucas shoved her forward into the arena. She stumbled, catching herself just a few yards from where Midnight fought against his restraints. The stallion's eyes locked on her, recognition flaring in their dark depths. Now, gentlemen, Victor announced, watch carefully. The principle is simple: find what a wild thing cares about and use it as leverage. He nodded to his men. Release the ropes. The handlers exchanged uneasy glances. Sir, one began, that horse is dangerous. Release them. Victor repeated, his voice like steel. Reluctantly, the men loosened their hold on the ropes. Midnight, sensing the change, immediately pulled free. Several of the observers gasped, backing away from the fence. But instead of charging or fleeing, the stallion remained in place, his attention fixed solely on Maya. You see, Victor said with satisfaction, he won't run while she's here. He's formed an attachment, a weakness we can exploit. Maya stood frozen as Midnight took a hesitant step toward her, then another. His ears were pricked forward, his movements cautious but deliberate. She could sense his confusion, his fear mingled with the pull of their connection. Now, Victor continued, drawing a training whip from his belt. We established dominance. He moved forward, placing himself between Maya and the horse. Midnight's ears flattened instantly, his body tensing at Victor's approach. The horse must learn, Victor explained to his audience, that even this connection is under our control. He snapped the whip, the sharp crack making both Maya and Midnight flinch. The stallion backed away, torn between his instinct to flee and his reluctance to abandon Maya. Come, Victor commanded the horse, his voice hard. When Midnight didn't respond, he cracked the whip again, closer this time. Come! Midnight pawed the ground, agitated and confused. Victor advanced, whip raised. Before he could strike again, Maya did something she had never done before at Black Ridge. She defied a direct order. She stepped around Victor, placing herself between him and the horse. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Victor's face darkened with anger. Move aside, girl, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Maya didn't budge. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she held her ground, her gaze steady on Victor's face. I said move. Victor raised the whip, the implicit threat clear. In that moment, something shifted in Maya. The fear that had ruled her life for 3 years gave way to a clarity as bright and sharp as lightning. She would not move. She would not allow Victor to hurt Midnight, even if it meant taking the blow herself. The whip descended. Maya didn't flinch, didn't close her eyes, but the strike never landed. Ethan's hand caught his father's wrist mid-swing, arresting the whip's arc. Enough, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. Father and son faced each other, tension crackling between them like electricity. The watching crowd had gone utterly silent, collectively holding their breath at this unexpected turn of events. "Take your hand off me, boy," Victor said, each word precise and venomous. "Not until you put the whip down," Ethan replied steadily. "This has gone far enough." For a long moment, neither man moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Victor lowered the whip. "Gentlemen," he said, addressing his guests without taking his eyes from his son, "it seems we'll need to postpone our demonstration. Lucas will show you the other horses we discussed." The observers, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before them, allowed themselves to be led away by the eager foreman. When they were gone, Victor turned his full attention to Ethan. "You dare interfere with my business in front of clients?" His voice was controlled, but fury radiated from him like heat. "I won't let you abuse a child to make a point about horse training," Ethan responded, standing his ground. Victor's laugh was sharp and humorless. "A child, she's property, just like every other worker on this ranch. I took her in when no one else would give her food shelter. She owes me." "She's a human being," Ethan countered, "not a training tool." "Your mother filled your head with this weakness," Victor spat. "Compassion is for fools and victims. I raised you to be neither." During this confrontation, Midnight had retreated to the far side of the arena, watching warily. Maya remained where she was, caught between father and son, her mind racing. The situation was spiraling out of control. Their escape plan, already compromised by Lucas's eavesdropping, now seemed impossible. Victor would never let his guard down after this public defiance. "Take the girl back to her quarters," Victor finally ordered, turning away. "We'll discuss your insubordination later. And as for her," he glanced coldly at Maya, "no meals for 2 days. Perhaps hunger will remind her of her place." He stalked away, his limp more pronounced with his anger. Ethan waited until his father was out of earshot before turning to Maya. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know he was planning this. Lucas must have told him about seeing us with Midnight last night, but I don't think he knows the full extent of our plan." Maya nodded, still trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. "We need to move faster," Ethan continued, glancing at Midnight, who remained at a distance watching them. "Victor will be watching us all more closely now. Can you get the horse to come to you? We need to get him back to the isolation barn before my father returns." Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She turned toward Midnight and slowly extended her hand, palm up. For a long moment, the stallion remained where he was, ears flicking back and forth as he assessed the situation. Then, with deliberate steps, he approached, not with the hesitant caution he had shown before, but with a new determination. He stopped before Maya, lowering his head to her outstretched hand. The gesture held a clear message: "I trust you." "Remarkable," Ethan murmured. "Let's go." Together, they led Midnight back to the isolation barn, Maya walking beside the stallion, with no rope or halter, only the invisible bond between them keeping him at her side. Ranch hands stopped to stare as they passed, amazed at the sight of the notorious killer horse following the silent girl like a devoted dog. As they reached the isolation barn, Raymond appeared from the shadows, his weathered face grave. "Lucas told Victor everything he overheard," he informed them in a low voice. "Not just about last night, but about your plans to contact the sanctuary. Victor's called in extra hands for security, and he's moved up the slaughterhouse transport to tomorrow morning." Maya's stomach dropped. One day. They had only 1 day left to save Midnight. "We need to leave tonight," Ethan decided. "After dark. Can you get the trailer ready, Raymond?" The older man nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. But getting off the property will be difficult. Victor's sure to have guards posted." "We'll need a distraction," Ethan said, thinking aloud. "Something big enough to draw attention away from the back gate." As they talked, Maya led Midnight into his stall. The stallion went willingly, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. She pressed her forehead briefly against his neck, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Maya," Ethan called softly, "we need to go before someone comes looking for us. We'll come back tonight, be ready." She nodded reluctantly, leaving Midnight's side. As she followed Ethan and Raymond out of the barn, a sense of finality settled over her. One way or another, by this time tomorrow, everything would change. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Maya was confined to her small room as punishment for her defiance in the arena. A ranch hand had been posted outside to ensure she didn't leave an unprecedented level of security that confirmed how seriously Victor was taking the situation. Through her window, Maya watched the ranch's activities with growing anxiety. Extra men patrolled the perimeter. Victor himself spent hours in the main office making phone calls and issuing orders. Trucks arrived carrying additional workers, hard-looking men she had never seen before. As afternoon faded into evening, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The air grew heavy with moisture unusual for the typically arid region. Weather reports had been warning of potential flash floods for days, the result of a rare atmospheric pattern that had stalled over northern New Mexico. The first distant rumble of thunder came as darkness fell. Maya paced her small room, wondering how the approaching storm would affect their escape plans. Would it provide useful cover or make travel more dangerous? A soft tap at her window startled her. Peering through the wire mesh, she made out Ethan's face in the gathering gloom. "We're moving now," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "The storm's a blessing. Most of the guards have taken shelter, and the rain will cover our tracks." He worked quickly to remove the mesh screen, creating an opening just large enough for Maya to squeeze through. She grabbed her few possessions, the tin box with her parents' photograph and her mother's embroidered cloth, the small pouch of herbs from Grace, and stuffed them into her pockets before climbing out. The air was electric with the approaching storm, the wind carrying the scent of rain. Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating the yard. Maya could see Raymond waiting by the edge of the barn area, keeping watch. "The trailer's ready behind the feed storage," Ethan explained as they hurried through the shadows. "Raymond will drive you and Midnight to the sanctuary. I'll follow in another vehicle to create confusion if we're pursued." "And if we're caught before we even get out?" Raymond asked quietly when they reached him. "We won't be," Ethan replied with more confidence than he likely felt. "I've created a diversion that should keep everyone busy for at least 30 minutes. As if on cue, shouts erupted from the direction of the main house. Orange light flickered against the darkening sky, not lightning but fire. "The old hay barn," Ethan explained, seeing Maya's alarmed expression. "Controlled away from the horses, but it'll draw everyone to that side of the property." Maya felt a chill despite the warm evening air. Fire. Ethan had used fire as their diversion, the very thing that haunted her nightmares. The irony wasn't lost on her, but there was no time to dwell on it. "Let's move," Raymond urged. "We need to get Midnight loaded before someone thinks to check the isolation barn." They hurried across the yard using the confusion of the fire response as cover. Ranch hands ran past, focused entirely on the growing blaze. No one paid attention to three figures slipping through the shadows in the opposite direction. When they reached the isolation barn, Maya's heart sank. Lucas stood at the entrance, a rifle cradled in his arms. His thin face wore a satisfied smirk. "Thought you might try something like this," he said as they approached. "Boss said to watch the horse no matter what else happened." He leveled the rifle at them. "Didn't expect you to go as far as arson, though. That'll add to your charges." "Lucas," Raymond said, stepping forward with his hands raised. "You don't want to do this. Victor's involved in something bad, something illegal. You could be implicated too." "Save it, old man," Lucas sneered. "I know where my loyalty lies. And it pays a hell of a lot better than whatever moral high ground you think you're standing on." Maya looked desperately toward the barn. Through the open door, she could see Midnight pacing his stall, agitated by the commotion outside. They were so close, but with Lucas blocking their path, armed and ready to shoot, their plan was falling apart. Suddenly, the sky opened. Rain poured down in a solid sheet so heavy and unexpected that all three of them momentarily looked up in shock. In that split second of distraction, a dark shape lunged from the shadows beside the barn. Grace Running Wolf, moving with surprising speed for her age, swung a heavy branch at Lucas's legs. The blow connected with a solid thud, sending him sprawling face first into the rapidly forming mud. The rifle flew from his hands, landing several feet away. "Grace!" Raymond exclaimed. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you from your own foolishness," the elderly woman replied calmly, keeping a wary eye on Lucas as he struggled to rise in the slippery mud. "Did you think I wouldn't know when the spirit horse was in danger?" "We need to hurry," Ethan urged, helping Raymond secure Lucas with a length of rope. "Someone will come looking for him soon." Inside the barn, Maya rushed to Midnight's stall. The stallion was visibly distressed, the scent of fire and the sound of commotion outside triggering his flight instinct. When she opened the stall door, he backed away, ears pinned and eyes rolling. "He's frightened," Grace observed, appearing at Maya's side. "The fire reminds him of how he was captured. They used smoke to drive the herd into a canyon." Maya looked at the old woman helplessly. How could they transport Midnight if he was too panicked to even leave his stall? "Speak to him," Grace instructed. "Not with your mouth, but with your heart. He knows your spirit." Maya closed her eyes, reaching deep inside herself for the connection she had built with Midnight over the past weeks. She thought of quiet nights spent in gentle communion of trust, slowly earned through patience and kindness. She extended her hand palm up and waited. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then tentatively, Midnight stepped forward. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent, familiar amid the chaos. He pressed his muzzle against her palm, a gesture of recognition and trust. "The trailer's just outside," Ethan said from the doorway. "But we need to hurry, the fire's drawing more attention than I expected." Leading Midnight from the barn proved easier than they had feared. Despite the rain, the commotion, and the distant glow of fire, the stallion followed Maya willingly. Only when they reached the trailer did he balk, eyeing the confined space with obvious suspicion. "He's never been trained to load," Raymond warned. "This could take hours we don't have." "We don't need training," Grace said. "We need trust." She turned to Maya, pressing something into her hand, a small leather pouch similar to the one she had given her before. "Crush this between your palms," she instructed. "Let him smell it on you, then walk into the trailer yourself. Don't look back, don't hesitate. Just trust." Maya did as she was told, breaking the dried herbs between her hands. The scent was earthy and sweet, strangely calming, despite the tense circumstances. She showed her herb-stained palms to Midnight, letting him investigate the unfamiliar aroma. Then, following Grace's instructions, she turned and walked confidently into the trailer. Each step required immense willpower to not look back, to not reveal the fear and doubt churning inside her. She reached the front of the trailer and finally turned. Midnight stood at the entrance, his powerful body tense with indecision. Rain streamed down his black coat, making him gleam in the dim light. For a heartbeat, Maya thought he would refuse, that their escape plan would fail at this final hurdle. Then, with deliberate dignity, Midnight stepped into the trailer. His hooves echoed on the metal floor as he made his way to Maya's side. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her knees weak. "Close it quickly," Raymond urged from outside. Ethan secured the trailer door, locking Midnight and Maya inside. Through the small windows, she could see the others preparing to leave, Raymond climbing into the driver's seat of the truck, Grace and Ethan having a hurried conversation beside another vehicle. The trailer lurched as the truck engine started. Maya steadied herself against the wall, one hand on Midnight's neck. The stallion tensed but remained calm, drawing reassurance from her presence. They were actually doing it. They were escaping. A sudden shout cut through the drumming of rain on the metal roof. Maya peered through the window to see Victor emerging from the darkness, his face a mask of fury. Behind him came several ranch hands, some still dripping from their efforts at the fire. "Stop them!" Victor bellowed, pointing at the truck and trailer. "Shoot the tires!" One of the men raised a rifle, taking aim. Before he could fire, Ethan launched himself at the man, knocking the weapon aside. The shot went wild, echoing across the yard. The truck lurched forward, Raymond accelerating away from the chaos. Maya caught a final glimpse of Ethan grappling with the ranch hand, of Victor's rage-contorted face, of Grace standing calmly in the rain, arms raised as if in blessing or protection. Then they were through the gate and onto the rough track that led away from Black Ridge Ranch. The trailer bounced and swayed as Raymond pushed the truck to its limits, putting as much distance as possible between them and their pursuers. Midnight nickered softly, pressing close to Maya in the confined space. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his wet mane. They had made it out, but she knew their journey was far from over. Victor would not let them go easily. And Ethan, she had seen him fighting, creating one last diversion to ensure their escape. Was he safe? Would he follow as planned? Or had he sacrificed himself to secure their freedom? Rain hammered on the roof as the trailer sped through the night, carrying them toward an uncertain future. Maya clung to Midnight, her silent companion in exile, and prayed that the others would be safe. The storm intensified as they drove, transforming the dusty landscape into a treacherous maze of flash floods and mud. Raymond navigated with the skill of someone who had spent decades traversing these back roads, but even his experience was tested by the deteriorating conditions. Inside the trailer, Maya worked to keep Midnight calm. The stallion was remarkably composed given the circumstances, the strange confinement, the violent motion, and the thunder that rattled the metal walls around them. He stood with his head lowered near Maya's shoulder, occasionally nickering softly when a particularly rough patch of road jostled them. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than 40 minutes, the truck slowed and then stopped. Maya peered through the small window but could see nothing beyond the curtain of rain. The driver's door slammed, and moments later Raymond appeared at the trailer window, water streaming from his hat brim. "Roads washed out ahead," he shouted over the storm. "We need to find another route." He unlatched the trailer door, allowing Maya to step out into the downpour. The intensity of the rain was shocking. It fell in solid sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. They stood on a narrow dirt road that had transformed into a river of mud. Ahead, illuminated by the truck's headlights, a section of the track had collapsed entirely, creating a miniature canyon impossible to cross. "Victor will have alerted the authorities by now," Raymond said grimly. "They'll be watching the main roads. We need to go cross-country to reach the sanctuary, but in this weather?" He shook his head, concern etched on his weathered face. A flash of headlights behind them made both turn. For a heart-stopping moment, Maya thought they'd been found. Then the approaching vehicle slowed, and Ethan emerged from the driver's side, soaked but apparently unharmed. "You made it," Raymond said with obvious relief. "Barely," Ethan replied, shouting to be heard above the storm. "My father's in a rage like I've never seen. He's called the sheriff, claiming we've stolen his prize stallion and kidnapped his ward." He turned to Maya. "Are you and Midnight okay?" She nodded, though "okay" seemed a pale description for the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. "We need shelter." Ethan continued surveying the washed-out road. "Somewhere to wait out the worst of the storm. We can't risk the sanctuary route with these conditions." "There's an old line cabin about 2 miles east of here," Raymond suggested, "used by the tribal rangers during fire season. Should be empty this time of year." "Can we reach it on these roads?" Ethan asked doubtfully. "Not by vehicle," Raymond admitted. "We'd have to go on foot. And the horse." Maya touched Raymond's arm, pointing to Midnight in the trailer, then to herself, and finally making a walking motion with her fingers. "You think Midnight will follow you across open country in this storm?" Raymond asked. Maya nodded confidently. Their bond had strengthened beyond mere trust. She knew the stallion would follow her anywhere. "It's risky," Ethan said, "but less risky than staying here until Victor's men find us." The decision made, they quickly gathered what supplies they could from the vehicles. A flashlight, some emergency blankets, a canteen of water, and a small first aid kit. Raymond had packed food for their journey to the sanctuary, which he transferred to a backpack for Maya to carry. Unloading Midnight from the trailer proved simpler than loading him had been. The stallion seemed eager to escape the confined space, stepping carefully down the ramp into the rain-soaked night. He shook himself vigorously, sending water flying in all directions, then moved to Maya's side, pressing against her, as if to shield her from the storm. "We'll head east through the arroyo," Raymond said, pointing toward a shallow ravine that ran alongside the road. "It's the most direct route to the cabin, but we'll need to watch for flash floods. This storm is turning the desert into a death trap." "What about the vehicles?" Ethan asked. "Have to leave them," Raymond replied. "By the time anyone finds them, we'll be long gone." With Raymond leading the way, they set off into the storm-lashed darkness. The rain had transformed the typically arid landscape into an alien terrain of mud and rushing water. Every depression became a pond, every dry wash a raging stream. They slogged forward, fighting against the elements with grim determination. Midnight proved to be an unexpected asset. The stallion seemed to sense danger before the humans, several times nickering a warning just before they encountered a treacherous section of ground. His night vision, far superior to theirs, helped guide them through the worst of the terrain. After nearly an hour of grueling progress, Raymond halted, raising a hand for silence. Through the drumming rain, Maya detected what had alerted him, the sound of an engine, faint but growing louder. "Down!" Raymond commanded, dropping to a crouch in the muddy arroyo. They huddled together as headlights swept the ridge above them. 2 vehicles moved slowly along the road they had abandoned, high-beam spotlights cutting through the rain as they searched the surrounding countryside. "Victor's men," Ethan whispered. "They're tracking us." Maya pressed close to Midnight, feeling the stallion's muscles tense beneath his sodden coat. If he made a sound, if he spooked at the unfamiliar lights, they would be discovered. She stroked his neck, willing him to remain calm. The vehicles paused directly above their hiding place. Voices carried down to them, indistinct but angry. A spotlight swept down into the arroyo, passing just feet from where they crouched in the mud. For a breathless moment, discovery seemed inevitable. Then miraculously, the beam moved on. After what seemed an eternity, the engines revved and the vehicles continued down the road, their lights gradually fading into the stormy night. "They'll be back," Raymond said grimly. "They know we're on foot, and they'll search every inch of this area once the storm lets up." They pressed on with renewed urgency, following the winding course of the arroyo until it opened into a broader valley. The rain had begun to slacken, though thunder still rumbled in the distance. Ahead, barely visible through the gloom, stood the outline of a small structure, the line cabin Raymond had mentioned. It was a simple one-room building, constructed of rough-hewn logs and roofed with corrugated metal. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. Inside the cabin was dusty but dry, a welcome respite from the relentless storm. "Midnight won't fit through the door," Ethan observed, eyeing the stallion's massive frame. "There's a lean-to on the back," Raymond replied. "Used to store firewood, but it should give him some shelter from the worst of the weather." While Ethan and Raymond worked to clear the lean-to, Maya explored the cabin's interior. A small iron stove occupied one corner, its chimney pipe extending through the roof. A narrow cot, its mattress long since claimed by mice, stood against the opposite wall. A crude table and two chairs completed the sparse furnishings. The men returned soaked to the skin, but satisfied with their work. "Midnight's settled," Raymond reported. "Seems content enough given the circumstances." "We should rest while we can," Ethan suggested, spreading one of the emergency blankets on the dusty floor. "At first light, we'll need to make some hard decisions about our next move." Maya nodded in agreement, her body aching with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through their escape was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. She wrapped herself in a blanket and curled up in a corner, using her backpack as a pillow. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive. Her mind raced with images from the past day, Victor's face contorted with rage, the desperate flight through the storm, the searchlight sweeping over their hiding place. And beneath these immediate concerns, deeper questions surfaced. What would happen to her now? Where would she go if they reached the sanctuary? Would she ever discover the truth about her parents' death? A soft sound from outside pulled her from these troubled thoughts. Rising quietly to avoid waking Ethan and Raymond, Maya made her way to the cabin door. Midnight stood in the lean-to, restless despite his exhaustion. When he saw her, he nickered softly, extending his muzzle toward her. Maya stepped out into the night. The rain had finally stopped, though clouds still obscured the stars. The air was cool and fresh, cleansed by the storm. She moved to Midnight's side, drawing comfort from his solid presence. For the first time since their escape began, Maya allowed herself to fully process what they had done. They had defied Victor Harmon, one of the most powerful men in the county. They had stolen his prized stallion and fled his ranch. There would be consequences, serious ones if they were caught. Yet despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of their future, Maya felt a sense of rightness in their actions. Midnight deserved freedom, she deserved truth. And if seeking those things meant becoming fugitives, then so be it. As if sensing her resolve, Midnight gently nudged her shoulder. Maya smiled, running her hand along his rain-slicked neck. Together they had already overcome so much. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the same way together. Inside the cabin, Ethan stirred, sitting up with a soft groan. Seeing Maya's empty blanket, he came to the door, relief washing over his face when he spotted her, with Midnight. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, joining her outside. Maya shook her head. "I keep thinking about what happens next," Ethan admitted. "My father won't stop looking for us, for you and Midnight especially. He's obsessed with that horse in a way I've never seen before." Maya gave him a questioning look. "I don't know why," Ethan continued, understanding her silent query, "but it's connected to those other horses, with the star marking the ones that disappeared. and I think it's connected to your parents somehow." He leaned against the cabin wall, his expression troubled. "When I was searching my father's study, I found something strange, an old Navajo text about a prophecy. Something about the one who commands the spirit horse will hold power over the valley. It didn't make sense to me then, but now." He glanced at Midnight, who watched them with intelligent eyes. "I think my father believes in this prophecy. He's been hunting horses with the star marking, trying to either control them or eliminate them." Maya frowned, struggling to understand. Could Victor really be motivated by some ancient superstition? It seemed absurd, yet it would explain his obsession with Midnight, his determination to break the stallion spirit. "Grace might know more," Ethan suggested. "She's meeting us at the sanctuary tomorrow if we can get there safely." A distant rumble made them both tense, but it wasn't thunder, it was engines. Vehicles moving slowly along the valley floor below the cabin. "They're still searching," Ethan whispered. "We need to warn Raymond." They ducked back inside, rousing the older man from his fitful sleep. Raymond listened to their report with grim concentration. "They're being thorough," he said. "More thorough than I'd expect even from Victor's men. He must have called in some serious favors." "Or serious threats," Ethan added. "My father has dirt on half the county officials." "We need to move before daylight," Raymond decided. "Once the sun's up, we'll be visible for miles in this open country." "Where can we go?" Ethan asked. "The sanctuary is still 20 miles south, and we'd have to cross open range to reach it." Raymond considered for a moment. "There's another option. The old mining tunnels near Coyote Ridge. They run for miles under the mountains, and some connect to tribal land. The entrance is maybe 5 miles east of here." "Tunnels," Ethan echoed doubtfully. "Would Midnight even enter something like that?" "He'll go where Maya leads him," Raymond said with certainty. "The real question is whether we can reach the tunnels without being spotted." They spent the next hour preparing for departure. The storm had left the landscape treacherous, but it had also provided a gift mud that would mask their tracks at least until they reached harder ground. Raymond sketched a rough map, plotting a route that would keep them in the shadow of the ridgeline, away from roads where Victor's men might be patrolling. As they worked, Maya noticed Midnight growing increasingly restless. The stallion paced the small confines of the lean-to-ears, pricked forward nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Something had disturbed him, something beyond the distant engines they had heard earlier. She stepped outside, placing a calming hand on his neck. Midnight snorted softly, his attention fixed on the eastern horizon. Maya followed his gaze but could see nothing through the pre-dawn darkness. "What is it?" Ethan asked, joining her. Before she could respond with even a gesture, a new sound reached them, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors, still distant, but growing closer. "Helicopter." Raymond confirmed, his voice tight with concern. "Victor's called in the big guns. They're doing an aerial search." "We need to move now," Ethan urged. "If they have thermal imaging, they'll spot us as soon as they fly over this ridge." Abandoning their careful preparations, they gathered their meager supplies and prepared to leave. The helicopter's approach lent urgency to their movements, transforming deliberate planning into desperate improvisation. "Head for the tree line," Raymond directed, pointing to a dense growth of pines that marked the beginning of higher elevation. "The canopy will provide some cover from above." They set off at a jog, Maya keeping one hand on Midnight's neck to guide him. The stallion seemed to sense the danger, moving with surprising stealth for an animal his size. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, the first gray hints of dawn, outlining the mountains against the retreating night. The helicopter's noise grew steadily louder, its searchlight sweeping the valley floor in methodical patterns. They reached the first scattered pines just as the aircraft crested the ridge behind them. Ducking into the deeper shadows, they watched as the powerful beam cut through the lingering darkness, illuminating the cabin they had just abandoned. "They'll check inside," Raymond whispered. "Then expand the search. We need to put as much distance as possible between us and that cabin before full light." They pushed deeper into the forest, following a game trail that wound upward toward the higher reaches of Coyote Ridge. The going was difficult. Fallen branches, slick with rain, created treacherous footing. More than once one of them slipped, saved from a serious fall only by the other's quick reactions. Midnight proved surprisingly nimble, picking his way through obstacles that challenged the humans. When they reached a particularly steep section, the stallion actually waited, allowing Maya to use his sturdy frame for support as she climbed. The sky continued to brighten dawn, transforming the world from gray shadows to define shapes and colors. The helicopter remained in the valley below its searchlight, now unnecessary in the growing daylight. They could see other vehicles as well, dark specks moving along the distant roads coordinating with the air search. "They're boxing us in," Raymond observed grimly, "pushing us toward the higher ground." "Isn't that where we want to go anyway?" Ethan asked. "To reach the tunnels." "Yes, but on our terms, not theirs. They know these mountains as well as I do. They'll have men positioned at the main passes and trails." The truth of their situation settled over them like a physical weight. They were being hunted methodically and professionally by men who knew the terrain and had resources they couldn't match. Their only advantages were Midnight's instincts and their own determination. As the sun cleared the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in gold and amber, they reached a natural overlook. Below them spread the valley they had traversed during the night, still puddled from the storm. The helicopter circled near the cabin while vehicles moved along the winding roads that bordered the valley floor. "There," Raymond said, pointing to a rocky outcropping about a mile distant. "The tunnel entrance is just beyond those red cliffs. If we can reach it without being spotted, we might have a chance." The route to the cliffs looked impossibly exposed, a section of open slope, with minimal cover clearly visible from both the air and parts of the valley below. It was a gauntlet they would have to run, trusting to speed and luck rather than stealth. "We'll wait until the helicopter moves to the far side of the valley," Raymond decided, "then make a run for it. Once we're in the tunnels, they'll have a much harder time tracking us." As they rested, gathering strength for the final push, Maya sat with her back against a pine trunk, Midnight standing protectively nearby. The stallion's ears constantly swiveled, tracking sounds beyond human hearing. His vigilance allowed her a moment of relative peace, a chance to collect her thoughts. So much had happened in the past 24 hours that she had barely had time to process it all. Her entire life had been uprooted again. But unlike the trauma that had silenced her 3 years ago, this upheaval felt different, purposeful rather than random, a choice rather than a tragedy imposed from outside. She withdrew the small tin box from her pocket, opening it to look at the half-burned photograph of her parents. What would they think of her now, running from authorities, a fugitive, alongside a horse everyone believed was dangerous? Would they understand her decision? Would they be proud of her for finally taking control of her own fate? A soft nicker from Midnight interrupted her thoughts. The stallion had tensed his attention, fixed on something beyond the ridge. Moments later, Maya heard what had alerted him. Voices carried on the morning breeze. Men moving through the forest below their position. Raymond and Ethan heard it too, exchanging alarmed glances. "Ground teams," Raymond whispered. "They're sweeping the forest." "The helicopter's moving away," Ethan observed, watching the aircraft bank toward the far side of the valley. "This might be our only chance to reach the tunnels." Raymond nodded grimly. "It's now or never. Stay low, move fast, and don't stop for anything." With a final check to ensure the search teams weren't immediately below them, they began their desperate dash across the exposed slope. Maya ran alongside Midnight, one hand buried in his mane for balance, as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Raymond led the way with Ethan bringing up the rear, constantly glancing over his shoulder for signs of pursuit. They were halfway to the cliffs when disaster struck. The helicopter, completing its sweep of the far valley, banked sharply and turned back in their direction. At almost the same moment, shouts erupted from the forest behind them. They had been spotted by the ground teams. "Run!" Raymond urged, abandoning any pretense of stealth. "Straight for the cliffs." They sprinted forward, no longer trying to stay low or seek cover. The helicopter accelerated toward them, its rotor wash bending the sparse vegetation as it closed the distance. Behind them, the shouts grew louder as the ground teams converged on their position. The red cliffs loomed larger with each desperate stride. Maya could make out the dark opening of the tunnel entrance, a shadowy gash at the base of the rock face. So close yet, with their pursuers closing in from multiple directions, it seemed impossibly far. Midnight suddenly surged forward, outpacing the humans. For a heart-stopping moment, Maya thought he was fleeing without them. Then the stallion circled back, positioning himself between the approaching helicopter and the fleeing group. He reared front hooves, slashing the air in challenge, his powerful form silhouetted against the morning sky. The helicopter pilot, confronted with this unexpected obstacle, veered sideways to avoid a collision. The momentary distraction gave the fugitives the precious seconds they needed to cover the remaining distance to the cliffs. Raymond reached the tunnel entrance first, waving Maya and Ethan inside. "Hurry!" Maya turned back, her heart seizing as she saw Midnight still standing his ground against the helicopter. She whistled the first sound she had voluntarily made in 3 years, a piercing call that cut through the chaos of shouts and rotor noise. The stallion's head snapped around at the sound. Their eyes met across the distance, a silent communication that needed no words. Then Midnight was running his powerful body, eating up the ground between them with effortless grace. He reached the tunnel entrance just as the first of the ground team crested the ridge behind them. Maya backed into the shadowy opening, drawing Midnight with her. The stallion hesitated at the threshold, natural caution, warring with his trust in her. Another whistle, softer this time, decided him. He ducked his proud head and followed her into the darkness. The last thing Maya saw before the shadows swallowed them was Victor Harmon himself emerging from the helicopter that had landed on the slope. His face, even at a distance, was a mask of fury and determination. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear but could easily imagine: threats, curses, promises of retribution. Then Ethan pulled her deeper into the tunnel, away from the entrance, and the man who had controlled her life for 3 long years. Darkness enveloped them, cool and sheltering after the exposed danger of the open slope. They had escaped for now, but as the sounds of their pursuers echoed at the tunnel mouth, Maya knew that their ordeal was far from over. Victor would not give up. The hunt was just beginning. Darkness wrapped around them like a living thing, thick and absolute. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the soft scrape of Midnight's hooves on the stone floor. Raymond's flashlight cast a weak yellow beam that barely penetrated the gloom, revealing rough-hewn walls slick with moisture. "These tunnels were abandoned 50 years ago," Raymond explained, his voice hushed in the enclosed space. "Silver mining operation that went bust when the veins ran dry. Some of the passages extend for miles under the mountains." They moved cautiously, the tunnel floor uneven beneath their feet. Midnight followed close behind Maya, his large body occasionally brushing the walls in the narrower sections. Despite his natural aversion to confined spaces, the stallion remained remarkably calm, his trust in Maya overriding his instinct to flee. Behind them, voices echoed from the entrance, Victor's men, debating whether to follow into the unknown darkness. The sound spurred the fugitives onward, deeper into the mountain's embrace. "There's a junction ahead," Raymond said, pausing at a fork in the tunnel. "Left leads to the main mining operation. Lots of side passages, easy to get lost. Right eventually comes out on tribal land, but it's a longer route." "Which way are they less likely to follow?" Ethan asked. "Left," Raymond decided. "More dangerous, some of those passages have collapsed over the years. They'll be cautious about pursuing us that way." "Then that's our route," Ethan said grimly. They turned left, the tunnel immediately narrowing and angling sharply downward. The air grew cooler, heavy with mineral scents and the distant drip of water. Their pace slowed as the terrain became more challenging, forcing them to navigate around fallen debris and support timbers that had long since rotted away. The voices from the entrance faded, replaced by the hollow echo of their own movements. Whether Victor's men had decided against following or had chosen the other passage, they couldn't be sure. The uncertainty kept them moving, pushing forward despite exhaustion and hunger. After what felt like hours but was likely less than one, Raymond halted again. "We need to rest," he said, his voice betraying fatigue. "Just for a few minutes." They settled in a small chamber where the tunnel widened briefly. Raymond positioned the flashlight on a rock ledge, its beam directed at the ceiling to provide ambient light. In the dim glow, Maya could see the toll their journey had taken. All 3 humans were mud-streaked and haggard, their clothes still damp from the previous night's storm. Midnight stood nearby, his dark coat making him nearly invisible in the shadows. Only his eyes caught the light reflecting it, like twin embers in the darkness. Maya moved to his side, finding comfort in his solid presence. "How much farther to the tribal lands?" Ethan asked, accepting a water bottle from Raymond. "Hard to say. These tunnels wind back on themselves. If we maintain this direction, maybe 3 or 4 hours of walking. And if Victor's men catch up to us before then." Raymond's silence was answer enough. They rested for 15 minutes, sharing the meager supplies. Raymond had packed some dried fruit, a few protein bars, and carefully rationed water. The brief respite renewed their determination, if not their strength. As they prepared to continue midnight, suddenly tensed ears pricked forward. A moment later, Maya heard what had alerted him, a distant rumble that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. "What was that?" Ethan whispered. Raymond's face tightened with concern. "Could be a tunnel collapse somewhere in the system. These old mines aren't stable, especially after heavy rain." Nari, the rumble came again louder this time, followed by a distinct cracking sound from the direction they had been heading. "Back," Raymond ordered urgently. "Move back!" They retreated just as a section of ceiling collapsed 20 feet ahead, sending a cloud of dust billowing through the tunnel. Rocks and soil crashed down, blocking the passage completely. Coughing in the choking dust, they stared at the wall of debris that now barred their way forward. "Are they blasting?" Ethan asked incredulously. "Is my father actually bringing down tunnels to trap us?" "Not blasting," Raymond replied grimly. "Natural collapse. The storm must have destabilized the whole system." He turned, shining the flashlight back the way they had come. "We need to find another route." Maya felt Midnight's rising anxiety. The confined space, the frightening sounds, the billowing dust all combined to test the limits of his trust. She stroked his neck, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. They backtracked to the junction, then paused to reconsider their options. The right-hand tunnel remained their only viable choice, but now they had to consider that Victor's men might be waiting there, having chosen that route initially. "We don't have much choice," Raymond acknowledged. "We'll proceed carefully, watch for signs of pursuit." The right-hand passage proved wider and better maintained than the left, evidence of more recent use. The floor was smoother, the ceiling higher, much easier for Midnight to navigate. They moved as quietly as possible, stopping frequently to listen for sounds of others in the tunnel. After nearly an hour of cautious progress, they reached another junction, this one with 3 branches. Raymond studied them with growing concern. "I don't remember this," he admitted. "I've only used these tunnels once before, years ago, and we took the other route." "So we're lost," Ethan said flatly. "Not lost, just uncertain of the exact path." A soft nicker from Midnight drew Maya's attention. The stallion was sniffing the air from the middle passage. His ears pricked with interest rather than alarm. She tugged gently on Raymond's sleeve, pointing to Midnight's behavior. "He senses something down that way," Raymond observed. "Could be fresh air, could be danger." "Or could be the way out," Ethan suggested. "Animals have better instincts than humans for these things." Maya nodded emphatically, her faith in Midnight's senses absolute. She took a step toward the middle passage, and the stallion immediately moved forward, leading rather than following for the first time since they had entered the tunnels. With few better options, they followed Midnight's lead. The tunnel sloped gradually upward, which Raymond took as a promising sign. "If we're gaining elevation, we might be heading toward an exit." The air did seem fresher as they continued, the oppressive weight of being underground gradually lifting. Midnight moved with increasing confidence, his pace quickening, as if he sensed their destination was near. Finally, after another 30 minutes of climbing, they saw a faint grayish light ahead, too diffuse to be artificial. An exit. Hope surged through them, lending new energy to their tired bodies. They hurried forward, the light growing stronger with each step. Midnight broke into a trot, eager for open space and fresh air after the confining darkness of the tunnels. The exit wasn't a proper opening, but a partial collapse where the tunnel ceiling had given way, creating a rough chimney that led to the surface. Daylight filtered down through a tangle of roots and soil. It was narrow, a tight fit for humans, and possibly impassable for Midnight. "I'll go first," Ethan volunteered, already climbing the rubble pile beneath the opening. "See if it's safe and if we can widen it for the horse." He scrambled up, using exposed roots as handholds, and disappeared through the hole. A moment later, his face reappeared, peering down at them. "We're on the eastern slope," he reported. "No sign of Victor's men. The opening's tight, but manageable for us." "For Midnight." He hesitated. "It's going to be a challenge." Raymond climbed up next to assess the situation, leaving Maya alone with Midnight. The stallion stood beneath the light shaft, looking upward with obvious longing. The scent of the outside world, pine trees, soil, open air, tantalized after hours in the mineral darkness of the tunnels. When Raymond returned, his expression was grim. "It's our only option," he said. "The opening can be widened, but it'll take time and make noise. And Midnight will still have to squeeze through." Maya looked at the stallion, at the powerful body that had evolved for running across open plains, not climbing through narrow openings. Could she ask this final test of his trust? Was there any alternative? A distant sound from deep in the tunnels answered her unspoken question, voices echoing through the stone passages. Victor's men had found their trail. "We're out of time," Raymond said urgently. "They're coming. Ethan's already working to widen the opening. Maya, can you get Midnight to try?" She nodded, though uncertainty clouded her heart. Leading the stallion to the rubble pile, she began to climb, encouraging him to follow. Midnight placed his front hooves on the loose stone, testing its stability. The material shifted beneath his weight, causing him to snort and back away. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the bobbing glow of flashlights in the darkness behind them. "Maya," Raymond urged. "They're getting closer." Desperation fueled her determination. Maya climbed halfway up the pile, then turned to face Midnight. Their eyes met in the half-light, hers pleading his wary but trusting. She whistled softly, the same sound she had used at the tunnel entrance. Midnight's ears pricked forward. With careful deliberation, he placed his hooves on the rubble again, this time committing to the climb. Maya continued upward, pausing frequently to ensure he was following. The material shifted and slid beneath his weight, but the stallion maintained his balance with remarkable agility. When they reached the narrow opening, Maya could see that Ethan had managed to dislodge some of the larger roots, widening the gap somewhat. It might be just enough if Midnight was willing to squeeze through. She went first, showing him it was possible. The tight space scraped her shoulders, dirt showering down as she pushed upward. Then she was through, emerging into the blessed openness of the forest. Ethan helped her to her feet as she turned immediately to the opening, whistling again for Midnight. The stallion's head appeared, his neck straining as he sought to force his much larger body through the gap. For a terrifying moment, he seemed stuck, panic flaring in his eyes. Maya dropped to her knees beside the opening, reaching down to touch his face to remind him of their connection. Below Raymond's urgent voice, "They're here, I can see their lights." With a tremendous effort, Midnight lunged upward, shoulders scraping against the earthen sides of the opening. Soil and small rocks cascaded down as he fought his way through. Maya and Ethan grabbed his mane, pulling to help, though their strength was negligible compared to the horse's own power. Then in a final surge, Midnight broke free. He scrambled onto solid ground sides, heaving small cuts on his shoulders where the rough edges had scraped his hide. But he was through. Raymond appeared in the opening a moment later, climbing out with desperate speed. "Run!" he gasped. "They're right behind me." They didn't wait to see if he was right. Maya swung onto Midnight's bare back, the stallion accepting her weight without hesitation. Raymond and Ethan followed on foot as they plunged into the forest, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the tunnel exit. They ran for nearly 10 minutes, the terrain sloping steadily downward through pine forest. When they finally paused to catch their breath, no sounds of pursuit reached them. "We might have gained some time," Raymond panted. "That opening was hard enough for the horse, they'll struggle to get through quickly." "Where are we?" Ethan asked, looking around at the unfamiliar forest. "Eastern slope of Coyote Ridge, I think. If so, we're close to tribal land." Raymond oriented himself, studying the angle of the sun through the trees. "The sanctuary should be about 8 miles southeast of here." Maya felt Midnight's muscles relax beneath her as the immediate threat receded. The stallion seemed to relish the open air and freedom of movement after the confined tunnels. His ears swiveled attentively, cataloging the forest sounds, birdsong, wind in the pines, the distant gurgle of a stream. "We should keep moving," Raymond advised. "Stay under tree cover as much as possible. If they get a helicopter up again, we'll be visible in open terrain." They continued at a more sustainable pace, Raymond leading the way through the dense forest. Maya rode Midnight while Ethan brought up the rear, frequently glancing back for signs of pursuit. The day had advanced to mid-afternoon, the sun beginning its westward descent behind the mountains. As they traveled, Maya's thoughts turned to what awaited them at the sanctuary. Would it truly offer refuge or merely a brief respite before Victor found them again? And what of the larger mysteries, her parents' death, Victor's obsession with the spirit horses, her own future? Now that she had burned every bridge to her former life. The forest gradually thinned as they descended, giving way to scattered juniper and piñon pine. The landscape opened into the rolling hills, characteristic of northern New Mexico, painted in shades of rust and gold by the afternoon sun. Without the dense tree cover, they felt exposed, vulnerable to aerial observation. "We need to cross that open stretch," Raymond said, pointing to a broad valley ahead. "The sanctuary lies just beyond those hills. Once we're on tribal land, Victor's influence diminishes significantly." They paused at the forest edge, scanning the sky for any sign of the helicopter. Seeing nothing, they began the crossing, moving as quickly as caution allowed. Midnight seemed to sense the importance of speed, maintaining a ground-eating trot that forced the humans to jog alongside. They were halfway across the open ground when the distant thrum of rotor blades reached them. The helicopter appeared over the ridge behind them, a dark silhouette against the blue sky. "They've found us," Ethan said grimly. "We'll never make it across before they spot us." Maya made a swift decision. Sliding from Midnight's back, she gestured for Ethan to take her place. When he hesitated, she pointed urgently toward the distant hills, then to herself and Raymond, mimicking a slower pace. "You want me to ride ahead," Ethan clarified. "Get to the sanctuary while you and Raymond follow." She nodded emphatically. Someone needed to reach the sanctuary to secure their safe haven before Victor's men caught up. Ethan was Victor's son. His presence might carry weight if authorities became involved. Raymond understood her logic. "She's right. You'll move faster on horseback. We'll follow as best we can. Tell Grace we're coming. She'll send help." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan mounted Midnight. The stallion snorted at the unfamiliar rider, but didn't resist. "Be careful," Ethan urged. "I'll send back help as soon as I reach a sanctuary." With that, he urged Midnight forward. The stallion broke into a gallop, powerful strides devouring the distance across the open valley. Maya watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as they receded into the distance, her beloved Midnight, carrying another racing towards safety without her. "Come on," Raymond said gently. "We need to keep moving. Stay close to the ground depressions, they'll provide some cover from above." They continued on foot, moving as quickly as their exhausted bodies would allow. The helicopter circled in the distance, apparently having spotted Ethan and Midnight. It changed course to follow them, ignoring the two figures making slower progress across the valley floor. "Looks like your plan worked," Raymond observed. "They're focused on the horse." A grim satisfaction filled Maya. Let Victor chase Midnight. The stallion was faster than any helicopter, especially with the hills and tribal lands so close now. By the time Victor realized his quarry had reached sanctuary, it would be too late. They had covered perhaps another mile when Raymond suddenly staggered, clutching his chest. His face contorted with pain as he sank to one knee. Maya rushed to his side, alarmed by the gray pallor that had replaced his usual weathered complexion. The old man pressed a hand to his chest, his breathing labored. "Just need a minute," he gasped. "Old ticker giving me trouble." Maya helped him to a seated position, fear gripping her heart. They were still miles from safety, exposed in open terrain, with no medical help available. Raymond was in his 70s, this level of exertion, after so little sleep, and food was pushing the limits of human endurance. "I'll be all right," Raymond insisted, though his ashen face belied his words. "Just let me rest a bit." The helicopter had disappeared beyond the distant hills, presumably still in pursuit of Ethan and Midnight, but Maya had no illusions that their respite would last. Victor would realize his mistake eventually, and then his focus would turn to the two figures left behind. After 15 minutes, Raymond struggled back to his feet, his determination overriding his body's protests. "We need to keep going," he said. "Can't stay in the open." They resumed their journey at a slower pace, Raymond leaning on Maya for support. Each step seemed to cost him tremendous effort, but he refused to stop again, his jaw set with grim resolve. The sun had begun to set when they finally reached the line of hills that marked the boundary of tribal lands. The landscape changed subtly, outcroppings of red rock emerged from the earth. Juniper trees twisted into fantastic shapes by wind and time. In the distance, the first scattered buildings of a small settlement appeared nestled in a protected valley. "The sanctuary?" Raymond confirmed, his voice weak but relieved. "We made it." As if his body had been waiting for this confirmation of safety, Raymond's legs gave way. He collapsed, Maya barely managing to break his fall. His eyes fluttered, his breathing shallow and rapid. Panic surged through Maya. They were so close, yet still too far for her to call for help. Raymond needed medical attention immediately. The sanctuary might as well have been miles away. A flash of movement in the valley below caught her attention. Riders on horseback moving quickly toward them from the direction of the settlement. Three figures led by a familiar black shape, Midnight, with Ethan still on his back returning with help. Relief weakened Maya's knees. She waved frantically, ensuring they saw her position on the hillside. The riders changed course, heading directly toward them. As they drew closer, Maya recognized Grace Running Wolf among them, her silver hair gleaming in the fading light. The third rider was a younger Navajo man dressed in the uniform of a tribal ranger. Maya, Ethan called as they approached. He slid from Midnight's back, rushing to where Raymond lay. What happened? She gestured to Raymond's chest, mimicking pain. Grace dismounted with surprising agility for her age, kneeling beside the old man. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking his pulse and breathing. Heart attack, she diagnosed grimly. He needs a doctor. She turned to the ranger. Radio ahead, tell Dr. Bentley to prepare. We'll bring him directly to the clinic. The ranger nodded, reaching for the radio at his belt. Ethan and the ranger carefully lifted Raymond onto the ranger's horse. The tribal officer mounted behind him, supporting Raymond's unconscious form. Take him now, Grace directed. We'll follow. As the ranger departed with his precious cargo, Grace turned to Maya. Your horse warned us, she said, nodding toward Midnight, who had moved to Maya's side. He was most insistent about returning for you. Maya wrapped her arms around Midnight's neck, burying her face in his mane. The stallion had not abandoned her. After all, he had simply completed his mission and returned for her, recognizing that Raymond needed help. Victor Harmon and his men crossed onto tribal land. Grace continued, her voice hardening. They were pursuing Ethan and the horse until our rangers intercepted them at the boundary. My father was forced to retreat, Ethan explained, but he's made formal complaints to the county sheriff. He's claiming we stole his property and assaulted his workers. Sovereign tribal land recognizes no such claims, Grace said firmly. You are under our protection now, but we should not linger here. The light fades and the night brings cold to these hills. She offered her horse to Maya, but the girl shook her head, turning instead to Midnight. Despite the day's ordeal, despite carrying Ethan to safety and returning for her, the stallion still had strength to give. Maya mounted, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her, the connection that had carried them both through so much. Grace nodded with approval. As it should be, the spirit horse chooses his rider. With Grace riding the spare horse and Ethan walking alongside, they made their way down to the valley. The sanctuary revealed itself gradually, not a formal facility as Maya had imagined, but a small community of traditional hogans and modern buildings, integrated respectfully into the landscape. Horses grazed in spacious paddocks, their forms silhouetted against the sunset. Other animals moved about as well, goats, a few cattle dogs that ran to greet the returning riders. They were led directly to a modern clinic at the center of the settlement. Raymond had already been taken inside, where Dr. Benali, a middle-aged Navajo woman with kind eyes and capable hands, had begun treatment. He's stabilized, she informed them. The heart attack was mild, caught in time. He'll need rest, but he should recover fully. The news lifted a weight from Maya's shoulders. She followed Grace to a small guest house where she could clean up and change into borrowed clothes. The simple building contained 2 rooms with basic furnishings, beds with colorful woven blankets, a table and chairs, a small bathroom with a shower that promised blessed warmth and cleanliness. Rest, Grace instructed. Midnight will be cared for in our special paddock, the one reserved for horses of his lineage. Food will be brought to you soon. Left alone, Maya stood under the shower's hot spray, watching as dust and grime from their journey swirled down the drain. With the immediate dangers behind them, exhaustion claimed its due. Her muscles ached, her mind a struggle to process all that had happened since their escape from Blackridge. Clean and dressed in soft borrowed clothes, Maya stepped outside to check on Midnight. The stallion had been settled in a spacious corral near the guest house, already provided with fresh water and hay. When he saw Maya, he nickered a greeting, seeming content in his new surroundings. A young Navajo girl of about 12 was sitting on the fence watching Midnight with undisguised admiration. She jumped down when she noticed Maya. Your horse is beautiful, she said shyly. Grandmother Grace says he's a spirit horse. I've never seen one before. Maya smiled, nodding in agreement. My name's Kimimela, the girl continued. It means butterfly in Lakota. My mom's Lakota, but my dad's Navajo, so I live here. She studied Maya curiously. Grandmother says you don't talk. That's okay. My cousin doesn't talk either, not since the car accident. But he listens real good, just like you. There was something refreshing about the girl's straightforward acceptance. No pity, no awkward attempts to make her speak, just acknowledgement and continued conversation, as if Maya's silence were simply another human variation, like hair color or height. I help with the horses, Kimimela explained proudly. I could take care of your spirit horse sometimes if you want. I know all about their special ways. Maya nodded, grateful for the offer. Kimimela beamed, clearly delighted to be entrusted with such an important responsibility. Dinner's almost ready at the community house, the girl said. I'm supposed to show you the way when you're ready. Maya gestured that she would follow, casting a last glance at Midnight to ensure he was settled. The stallion was already dozing, one hind leg cocked in relaxation, his ears softly flicking at the night sounds. The community house was the largest building in the sanctuary, its design blending traditional elements with modern functionality. Inside, long tables were set for the evening meal. About 30 people had gathered: sanctuary workers, tribal members, and a few visitors. Ethan sat with Grace near the head table, deep in conversation. Conversation paused briefly as Maya entered, curious eyes turning to assess the newcomer. But there was no hostility in their gazes, only interest and a certain respectful distance. Kimimela led her to a seat near Ethan and Grace, proudly announcing, I brought her grandmother, just like you asked. Grace nodded approvingly. Thank you, little butterfly. Now go help with the serving. As the girl skipped away, Grace turned to Maya. My granddaughter has appointed herself your guide. I hope you don't mind. She has a good heart, if a busy tongue. Maya smiled, indicating she didn't mind at all. Raymond is resting comfortably, Grace continued. The doctor says he'll need to stay quiet for several days, but the prognosis is good. We were just discussing next steps, Ethan added. My father won't give up easily. He's already filed formal complaints claiming we stole Midnight and that you were taken against your will. Such claims have no power here, Grace said firmly. But we must be prepared for his persistence. Victor Harmon is not a man who accepts defeat. A young man approached their table, leaning down to whisper something in Grace's ear. Her expression remained impassive, but Maya detected a subtle tension in the set of her shoulders. It seems we will need those preparations sooner than expected, Grace announced. Sheriff Donovan is at the boundary requesting entrance to speak with us. He has papers, legal documents of some kind. Nirashom, my father works fast, Ethan muttered. The sheriff's an old hunting buddy of his. Nevertheless, we will hear what he has to say, Grace decided. Our sovereignty gives us that luxury. She rose, gesturing for Ethan and Maya to follow. Come, let us meet the sheriff together. They walked to the sanctuary's entrance, where two tribal rangers stood guard at a simple wooden gate. Beyond it, a county sheriff's vehicle waited, its light bar activated but silent. Sheriff Donovan, a heavy-set man with a florid face, stood beside it, accompanied by a deputy and a third man in a business suit. Ms. Running Wolf, the sheriff called as they approached. I need to speak with you about some fugitives you're harboring. There are no fugitives here, Sheriff, Grace replied calmly. Only guests of the tribe. I've got papers that say otherwise. He held up an official-looking document. Court order for the return of a minor child to her legal guardian, Victor Harmon, and for the recovery of stolen property, specifically a black stallion valued at $50,000. Those papers have no jurisdiction on sovereign tribal land, Grace reminded him. As you well know. Maybe so, but they're valid the moment any of you step off this reservation, and they'll still be valid tomorrow when I return with federal marshals. He pointed directly at Maya. That girl is a ward of the state placed under Harmon's legal guardianship. Custodial interference is a federal offense. The girl has evidence of abuse and exploitation, Ethan countered, stepping forward. And as for the horse, the man in the business suit interrupted. Mr. Harmon has provided full documentation of ownership, including registration papers and bill of sale. There's no ambiguity here, legally speaking. And you are, Grace asked, her tone deceptively mild. Andrew Phillips, Mr. Harmon's attorney. He handed a business card through the gate. I strongly advise you to comply voluntarily. It will go easier for everyone. We'll consider your advice, Grace replied, pocketing the card without looking at it. In the meantime, it's getting late. I suggest you return to town and enjoy a comfortable night at the motel. These roads are dangerous after dark. The dismissal was clear, though politely delivered. Sheriff Donovan's face darkened with anger, but he knew better than to push further, at least for now. This isn't over, he warned. I'll be back at first light with federal support if necessary. We'll be here, Grace assured him, unruffled. She watched until the sheriff's vehicle had disappeared down the road before turning back to Maya and Ethan. Come, we have preparations to make. They returned to the community house where Grace called together a council of elders and sanctuary leaders. The meeting was conducted primarily in Navajo with occasional translations for Ethan's benefit. Maya didn't need words to understand the gravity of the situation. It was written on every face. After nearly an hour of discussion, Grace addressed them in English. The council has decided the spirit horse and his chosen one must be taken to the sacred caves in the High Canyon. There they will be beyond Harmon's reach while we contest his claims legally. The caves? Ethan questioned. Is that safe? Safer than remaining here when federal marshals arrive, Grace replied. The caves are known only to tribal members, accessed by paths that do not appear on any government map. They have sheltered our people in times of trouble for 1,000 years. When do we leave? Ethan asked. You don't, Grace said firmly. You will remain here with Raymond. As Victor's son, your testimony about his activities is valuable. We need you to speak with our tribal lawyers. But Maya will not be alone. Kimamela's father, Thomas, will guide her. He is our best tracker and knows the caves better than anyone. Grace turned to Maya. It's a difficult journey, possible only on horseback. Are you willing? Maya nodded without hesitation. If this was what it took to keep Midnight safe, to uncover the truth about her parents and Victor's obsession, she would go. Then it's settled. You'll leave before dawn. Grace's weathered hand covered Maya's. Do not fear, child. The spirits of our ancestors watch over those who protect the sacred horses. And you will not be hidden forever, only until we can establish legal protection. As the meeting dispersed, Maya found herself drawn to the clinic where Raymond was recovering. The old man was awake, propped up on pillows, his face still pale, but his eyes clear and alert. Maya, he greeted her with a weak smile. Grace told me about the sheriff. I'm sorry I can't go with you to the caves. She shook her head, indicating he had nothing to apologize for. There's something you should know before you go. Raymond continued, his voice lowering. Something about your parents and why Victor is so obsessed with horses like Midnight. Maya leaned closer, her full attention captured. Your mother was documenting the spirit horse bloodline for the Bureau of Land Management, proving their cultural significance to prevent roundups on tribal lands. Your father was investigating trafficking of protected species. He paused, gathering strength. They discovered that Victor was selling spirit horses to foreign buyers, wealthy collectors who believed in the power of the Navajo prophecy. Maya frowned, not fully understanding. The prophecy says that whoever commands the spirit horse commands the valley. It's about harmony with the land, about stewardship. But Victor and his buyers twisted it, saw it as literal power. Raymond's voice grew fainter with fatigue. Your parents had proof of his operation. The factory fire wasn't an accident. It was meant to destroy that evidence and silence them. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Victor hadn't just taken her in after her parents' death. He was responsible for it. The knowledge crystallized her resolve. This wasn't just about saving Midnight anymore. It was about justice for her parents. Raymond seemed to read her thoughts. Be careful, Maya. Victor is desperate now. He knows that if you testify, if you connect him to your parents' death, everything he's built will crumble. She nodded solemnly, a promise in her eyes. One more thing, Raymond added, reaching beneath his pillow. He withdrew a small thumb drive. Your mother gave me this for safekeeping just days before the fire. I've never looked at what's on it, but I suspect it contains the evidence they gathered. Take it with you. Maya accepted the small device, tucking it securely into her pocket. Its weight was negligible, yet it felt momentous, a tangible link to her parents and their unfinished work. After leaving Raymond to rest, Maya returned to the guest house to prepare for the journey ahead. Grace had provided a backpack with essential supplies, food, water, a first aid kit, warm clothing for the higher elevations. Maya added her own treasured possessions, the tin box with her parents' photo, her mother's embroidered cloth, and now the thumb drive that might hold the key to everything. Sleep proved elusive despite her exhaustion. Too much had happened, too many revelations had shaken her world. She lay awake watching moonlight filter through the window, thinking of the winding path that had led her here from speechless orphan to fugitive, from victim to potential witness against the man who had destroyed her family. And through it all, the constant presence of midnight, the unlikely bond that had given her courage when she needed it most. Tomorrow they would journey together into the mountains seeking refuge in ancient caves, while others fought legal battles on their behalf. It wasn't the end of their story, merely another chapter in an odyssey neither could have imagined when they first locked eyes across a dusty barn. Outside, a coyote called to the night, its haunting cry echoing across the valley. To Maya, it sounded like a promise of wild things, persisting of spirits, unbroken of truth, eventually coming to light. She would be ready when dawn came. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Maya was awakened by a soft knock. Thomas Kimimela's father stood outside the guest house, his expression solemn in the pre-dawn gloom. "It's time," he said simply. Maya gathered her backpack and followed him to the corral where midnight was already waiting, saddled with a lightweight western rig. The stallion seemed to sense the importance of the day ahead, standing quietly as Maya approached. "My daughter insisted on preparing your horse herself," Thomas explained with a hint of amusement. "She's quite taken with both of you." As if summoned by her father's words, Kimimela appeared from the shadows, carrying a small leather pouch. "For the journey," she explained, handing it to Maya. "Grandmother made it special herbs to keep the spirit horse strong and to protect you both." Her young face was serious beyond her years. "You'll come back, won't you, when it's safe?" Maya nodded, touched by the girl's concern. She impulsively hugged Kimimela, trying to convey through the gesture what she couldn't say in words. "We should go," Thomas urged gently. "We need to be well into the canyons before full light." Maya mounted midnight, settling into the unfamiliar saddle. The stallion shifted beneath her, adjusting to the weight distribution, but showed none of the resistance he had displayed with Victor's handlers. Thomas mounted his own horse, a sturdy paint gelding, well suited to mountain trails. Grace appeared as they prepared to depart, her silver hair gleaming in the dim light. "The council has contacted our lawyers in Santa Fe," she informed them. "They're preparing challenges to Victor's guardianship claims and documentation of Midnight's lineage as culturally protected." She placed a weathered hand on Maya's knee. "The caves will keep you safe until these matters are resolved. Trust Thomas, trust your horse, and trust the spirits of our ancestors who watch over this land." With those words of parting, they set off riding away from the sanctuary as the first golden rays of sunlight touched the highest peaks. Their route took them northwest away from the main roads and into increasingly rugged terrain. Thomas set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or offering brief explanations of the land's significance. "We follow game trails where possible," he explained, "less visible from the air, and the horses have surer footing." The morning advanced as they climbed higher into the mountains. The vegetation changed gradually, pine and juniper, giving way to aspen groves that shimmered with newly unfurled spring leaves. Wildflowers dotted meadows between rocky outcroppings, painting the landscape in splashes of purple, yellow, and white. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of flatbread, dried meat, and berries. Thomas remained vigilant, constantly scanning the sky and distant ridgelines for any sign of pursuit. "How much farther to the caves?" Maya asked through gesture, pointing ahead, and then forming a question with her expression. Thomas understood. "We'll reach the outer canyon by nightfall. The caves themselves are another half-day's journey from there, accessible only by a hidden trail." They continued their ascent through the afternoon, the trail growing steeper and more challenging. Midnight navigated the difficult terrain with surprising skill for a horse raised on open plains. His sure-footedness and willingness to trust Maya's guidance demonstrated an adaptability that matched his proud spirit. As evening approached, they entered a narrow canyon flanked by towering red rock walls. The path wound along a small stream that had carved this passage over countless millennia. The air grew cooler in the shadows, carrying the scent of water and stone. "We'll camp here tonight," Thomas decided, indicating a small clearing sheltered by overhanging rock. The canyon acts as a natural fortress, only one way in or out and easy to defend if necessary. They made a simple camp no fire to avoid detection, just bedrolls spread beneath the stars that were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. The horses were hobbled nearby, allowing them to graze on the sparse vegetation, while preventing them from wandering far. As darkness claimed the canyon, Thomas shared stories of his people, tales of survival, of connection to the land of ancient wisdom passed down through generations. Though he directed his words to Maya, she sensed he was speaking as much for himself as for her, drawing strength from cultural memories that had sustained his tribe through centuries of hardship. The spirit horses have always been sacred to us, he explained, not as possessions or symbols of power, but as messengers between worlds. They choose their human companions, just as midnight chose you. Maya glanced at the stallion, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Chose her. The concept resonated deeply, explaining the inexplicable bond that had formed between them from their first meeting. Rest now, Thomas advised. Tomorrow's trail is difficult, but it leads to safety. Despite the hard ground and unfamiliar surroundings, Maya slept soundly, lulled by the gentle murmur of the stream and midnight's occasional soft nickering. Her dreams were filled with images of running horses, of open skies, of her parents smiling with pride. She woke before dawn to the sound of Thomas already preparing for departure. The air was crisp with mountain cold, her breath forming small clouds in the blue pre-dawn light. We should move quickly, Thomas said, his tone conveying urgency without alarm. I heard helicopter rotors in the night distant, but heading this direction. They packed swiftly, erasing all signs of their camp before mounting and continuing up the canyon. The path narrowed as they progressed, in some places barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file. The stream beside them had dwindled to a trickle, suggesting they were nearing its source high in the mountains. By mid-morning, they reached what appeared to be the end of the canyon, a sheer rock wall rising hundreds of feet toward the sky. Thomas dismounted, gesturing for Maya to do the same. The visible path ends here, he explained, which is exactly the point. What can't be seen can't be followed. He led them to the rock face, which from a distance appeared solid and impenetrable. Only up close did Maya notice the narrow crevice, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. It was cleverly hidden by an outcropping that cast constant shadow over the opening. The horses must go first, Thomas said. It widens inside. He led his paint gelding to the crevice. The horse hesitated only briefly before squeezing through the narrow opening. Maya approached with Midnight, who eyed the dark passage with understandable suspicion. He trusts you, Thomas reminded her. Show him the way is safe. Maya stepped into the crevice, tugging gently on Midnight's reins. The stallion's nostrils flared as he assessed this new challenge. After a moment's consideration, he followed carefully, navigating the tight space with Maya's encouragement. As Thomas had promised, the passage widened almost immediately into a hidden valley, a secret paradise invisible from the outer canyon. Lush vegetation surrounded a clear spring pool, fed by water seeping from the rock itself. The valley floor was carpeted with grass, while fruit trees, likely planted by tribal members generations ago, offered shade and sustenance. The caves are there, Thomas said, pointing to the far wall of the valley, where several dark openings were visible at different heights. Natural chambers enlarged by my ancestors. Some go deep into the mountain, connecting to other valleys beyond. If danger comes, you can retreat further in. He led them to the largest cave entrance, easily accessible from the valley floor. Inside, the space opened into a surprisingly large chamber, its walls adorned with ancient pictographs depicting horses, humans, and spiritual symbols. Smooth stone platforms along the walls provided natural sleeping areas, while smaller side chambers offered storage space. People have sheltered here for thousands of years, Thomas explained, his voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. Now it's your turn. He unloaded supplies from his saddlebags, additional food blankets, a solar-powered lantern, and a two-way radio. This is set to a secure frequency, he said, showing Maya how to operate the radio. Use it only in emergency. I'll check in each evening at sunset. He paused, studying her face. You're not afraid to stay here alone? Maya shook her head. With Midnight beside her, she feared nothing this peaceful valley could present. Her only concerns lay beyond it, with Victor's continued pursuit with Raymond's recovery, with the legal battle being waged on their behalf. "You'll be safe here," Thomas assured her. "The tribe knows of your presence, but even among our own people, few know the exact location of these caves. Food and water are plentiful, and the upper caves provide excellent vantage points to see anyone approaching through the canyon." He spent the remainder of the day showing Maya the valley's resources, which plants were edible, how to access the higher caves, where the best grazing areas were for midnight. By late afternoon, he was ready to depart. "I must return to report your safe arrival," he explained, "and to help prepare our defenses against Victor's legal challenges." Maya nodded in understanding. As Thomas mounted his horse to leave, she placed a hand on his arm, trying to convey her gratitude through the simple gesture. "No thanks needed," he said with a gentle smile. "The spirit horse chose you. That makes you family." With those words, he rode back toward the hidden crevice, leaving Maya and Midnight alone in their mountain sanctuary. As his figure disappeared, Maya turned to survey her temporary home, the secluded valley, the protective caves, the abundant natural resources. It was a place of safety, yes, but also of profound peace. She led Midnight to the spring pool, allowing him to drink his fill before removing his saddle and bridle. The stallion immediately rolled in the lush grass, shaking off the constraints of domestication with obvious pleasure. When he regained his feet, he pranced around the valley's perimeter, exploring his new domain with the curiosity of his wild ancestors. Maya watched him, joy blossoming in her chest at his obvious contentment. Here, hidden from those who would exploit him, Midnight could simply be neither a prize to be broken nor a symbol to be possessed, but a magnificent creature living according to his nature. As the sun began its descent behind the western canyon walls, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Maya settled at the cave entrance. From this vantage point, she could see the entire hidden valley, with Midnight now grazing peacefully near the spring. For the first time since her parents' death, Maya felt a sense of belonging, of rightness in her place in the world. This sanctuary was temporary, she knew. Eventually, they would need to return to face Victor and the truth about her parents' murder, to build whatever future awaited them beyond these protective mountains. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to be here, alive, free, and connected to a spirit as wild and resilient as her own. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. The spirit horse and his chosen one, bound by trust, forged in adversity, strengthened by trials overcome, and destined for a future neither could yet imagine. As the sun sets over the sacred mountains, casting long shadows across the hidden valley, Maya and Midnight stand together at the entrance of the ancient cave. Their journey is far from over, but in this moment they have found something most never discover: a connection that transcends words, that defies the boundaries between human and animal. They came together as captives, she in her silence, he in his rage, both labeled as broken by a world that values compliance over spirit, both carrying wounds that seemed impossible to heal. Yet in each other they found not just escape but understanding, not just freedom but purpose. The road ahead will demand more courage, more trust, more leaps of faith into the unknown. Victor's shadow still stretches long, and justice for Maya's parents remains an unfinished chapter. But something fundamental has shifted in the universe. Two spirits once lost have found their true north in each other. Perhaps that's what it means to be truly wild, not to exist without connection, but to choose your bonds freely, to recognize a kindred soul across impossible divides, to stand together at the edge of uncertainty and face it without fear. What wilderness awaits in your own heart? What voice might you find in silence? What freedom and trust? The night deepens around the mountain sanctuary, stars appearing one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. But neither Maya nor Midnight feels alone anymore. Some bonds once formed can never truly be broken.